whoever was behind me was just one of the employees. But then, seemingly just to disprove that theory, the guy moves closer to me and starts breathing down my neck. I was getting very uncomfortable, but then, just as I was about to say something...
Hello, and welcome to all Dente Creepypasta, horror stories cooked to perfection with a splash of red sauce. My name is CZ, and I will be your server this episode. Today's special comes in many courses. As we celebrate the 10th episode of this series, we're going to be looking back at some of the best stories from Season 1. This is going to be a long compilation of original scary stories, so I'd recommend throwing this on to listen to in the background during school or work, while you're in the car, while you're surfing the web, or, if you're really brave, put this video on before bed and see if you can fall asleep. Now, I don't usually say this until the end, and I do kind of hate when YouTubers bring this up before you've watched the actual video, but since this is such a long one, I think now is a good time to remind you to make sure you've subscribed to the channel and turn death bell notifications on so you don't miss out on new horrors every week. Oh, and one more thing. I've hidden a surprise somewhere in this video, so those of you who listen through the entire thing will get to see it. So with all the formalities out of the way, let's dig right in. Number 1. This strange man is in all of my dreams.
I'm sitting in an airport right now. My flight is delayed, so I'm going to do my best to write this story before it's time to board the flight. Have you ever dreamed of a character who seems to only exist in your dreams? Most of the characters in my dreams are people that I know in real life. Occasionally, I'll dream of a character from a TV show or a celebrity crush, but the point is, they're all people that I can picture in my head. Sure, there may be one that I made up from time to time, but if that does happen, they're usually only going to appear in one dream. Except for this one guy. For the last few years, this guy has been in almost every one of my dreams, at least the ones that I can remember. As far as I know, he's never had a name. He's bald, probably in his 60s or something, though I suck at guessing people's ages. He has a thin mustache and wrinkles around his eyes. Yellow teeth, not real straight. I wouldn't call him overweight, but he's definitely not in shape. The strange thing is, this is the first time I've been able to clearly remember what he looks like outside of my dream. But I'll get back to that in a minute. So, usually this man just shows up in random situations in my dream. Like, he might be delivering me this package, or if I'm having a test dream, he'll be the teacher. If I'm being chased in my dream, he's usually the malevolent pursuer. If it's a getting walked in on dream, he tends to be the one to catch me. So he always plays that kind of role. I don't think I've ever held a conversation with him in any of these. I can't really remember him talking at all, to be honest. So that brings me to today. I'm flying out of Denver for work, and the flight gets delayed because of inclement weather. It's early morning, and I'm tired, so I decided to nod off for a bit in the airport. Now, I can never remember the beginning of my dream, but the first thing I remember was watching my son play Jak and Daxter. And quick backstory on that. My kid was really into The Last of Us, so I recently dug out my old PS2 and introduced him to Jak and Daxter, because they're made by the same studio, and he really took a liking to it. I don't know if other people have this happen in their dreams, but I have a lot of dreams where I'll be watching a movie or playing a game, and I kind of gradually become one of the characters. I'm assuming I'm not the only one who gets that. So I'm in this game, and I'm exploring this area called Misty Island. I think I was supposed to be finding this power cell or something. I don't remember the exact details of the objective, but me and my son were both inside the game. He kept running ahead to explore, and I would try to keep close to him, because as the name of the island suggests, it was very hazy, and I was afraid he was going to get lost or something was going to happen to him. The problem is, I kept slipping on the gravel underneath my feet. It was becoming a challenge to even stay upright. He was just kind of running around carelessly, and I lost him for a minute as he ran around this cliff. I sprinted to catch up with him. When I came around the cliff, there was nothing there. I was not only worried about my son getting lost, but also the threat of lurkers. Which, if you're not familiar with the game, those are the creepy purple reptilian creatures with yellow eyes. Almost on cue, one of those creatures crawled out of the cliffside, crossed right in front of me, stopping me in my tracks. It continued onward towards the shore and disappeared in the fog. Then I noticed someone standing far in the distance, shrouded in fog. I called out my son's name, but he didn't respond. He was just standing still, staring at the water. I began to run up towards him, when a lurker bounded from the trees, jumped and struck him in the head before scampering off. My heart sank in my chest, and I sprinted with everything I had. When I reached him, I discovered it was not my son, but rather... No, it couldn't be. What I saw laying there in the sand was the man from my dreams, only in video game polygon form. Somehow his appearance was even creepier in compressed textures and PS2 graphics, yet the injury to his head was terrifyingly realistic. His body then compressed into green echo in the typical fashion of video game death animations, and he was gone. I progressed to the area that is essentially the end of the level where I saw my son standing up on the platform, waiting for me. As I got closer, I noticed there was someone else standing there as well. Sure enough, it was the man again. He had his hand on my son's shoulder, and they were both just staring at me. Not knowing what to do, I froze in my tracks. Before I could come to a decision, I was jolted out of the game. I was back in my son's room, staring at the blank screen. I looked over to the chair my son had been sitting in. What I saw was the cord from his controller stretched across the chair, like he'd gotten up and was sitting as far back as the cable length would allow him. I followed the stretched cable with my eyes to meet my son's gaze, but I was instead met with... An adult pair of hands dropped the plastic controller to the floor. It was him. He was just grinning at me with the most insane stare. I was startled, nearly falling back out of my chair. My first instinct was to swing my feet around and stumble out of the room. I ran down the hall. The house seemed to be empty, but strangely all of the doors in every room were open. I looked over my shoulder as I turned the corner. He had grown about 9 feet tall, and his eyes were deadlocked on me as he ducked under the doorframe exiting my son's room and began to make his way in my direction. I went for the front door. In typical nightmare fashion, it was locked, but for whatever reason, I didn't think to just reach down and unlock it. I fiddled with the doorknob anxiously as I looked over my shoulder and saw the man walking around the corner and coming for me with that creepy grin on his face. The doorknob fell to the ground. This thing had broken off or something. As a last-ditch effort, I reared back and just kicked the door in. What happened next is sort of difficult to put into words. I was in the car, just driving as fast as I could, within reason. It was a lot like the phenomenon I explained earlier, where at first I was watching the video game, and then we are gradually in it. In this case, I started off alone in the car, but at some point I realized I was in the car with that guy. I know it doesn't make sense, but in the context of the dream, I didn't question it. He wasn't making any moves or anything. Literally, he was just sitting there with this stupid grin. But as time went on, I was just getting more nervous that he was about to do something. I kept looking over at him, looking back at the road, then back at him. I was trying to keep an eye on him to make sure he wasn't going anywhere. Him, the road, him, the road. The next time I looked back at him, he was breathing more and more heavily. I was getting nervous. My palms were sweating. I looked back at the road to find I'd run out of road. I was about to drive over the edge into the water. I slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. I broke through the barrier and propelled off the edge. A shiver went up my spine as I started to wake. To my relief, it was just all a crazy dream. Just as I woke up, a woman in a purple dress swiftly crossed in front of me. My gaze followed her to the window. It was almost white with fog. It seemed that there would be a significant delay until we could take off. Just then, I dropped my bottle of water I had purchased before heading to my gate, and forgotten that I'd fallen asleep with it in my hand. I reached down to grab it, and as I came back up, I saw something that frightened and disturbed me. The man from my dreams. He was sitting in the seat across from me, just grinning at me.
Number 2. Costume Shop.
I know Halloween is supposed to be a spooky holiday, but
My first Halloween experience left me with scars and nightmares for years to come. Having moved to the USA when I was 17, I had never actually celebrated Halloween before because it wasn't even a known holiday in my home country. A few years later, when I got my first job as a computer consultant, I wanted to do whatever I could to get ahead and move up in the company. When my boss mentioned that there would be a company Halloween party, I saw this as an opportunity to impress by finding the best costume in the office. I wanted to avoid the cheap quality of pop-up Halloween stores, so I found a nice costume rental shop with some supposedly higher quality wares. I headed over there after staying late at work that night. It was pretty far away in the middle of nowhere, but I was hoping it would be worth the extra miles. I got in there about an hour before close, but to my surprise, the place was pretty much empty. There was only one customer in there, despite the fact that we were already pretty late into October. I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to go as, so the owner of the store helped me pick out several costumes that I was interested in and let me into the changing room to see how they all looked on me. I started to get undressed when I heard the door chime, signaling that someone was entering or leaving. This was a fairly large shop, but it was small enough that I could hear what was going on in the front from where I was, which is why my heart sank when I heard this. Put your hands up, this is a robbery. I then hear a horrified scream, which I think was coming from the other customer that was in the store with me. You, don't move. Get up against the wall. I said, back to the wall now. That was a different voice. As far as I could tell, there were at least 2 men who were operating this. The entire store was suddenly silent. That's when I heard what seemed like the loudest gunshot I've ever heard. I literally had to cover my own mouth to prevent myself from gasping or screaming, and tried to stay as quiet as possible. Open up the register and step away. I heard the familiar sound of a cash register opening, and it was quiet for a few moments as I could only hear people shuffling around, which I assume was the guy hopping over the counter and unloading the register into a bag or something. After that, there was a quieter exchange between the first robber and the owner of the store. I couldn't hear it very clearly, but from what I could gather, the robber had asked to be taken to the vault or something like that. It seemed like the accomplice stayed back with the other customer, and the lights in the entire store had been turned off, possibly to make it look like they were closed from the outside. I thought about calling the police, but I was afraid that they would hear me given how quiet it was and how well sound seemed to travel in the store. My hands were shaking as I tried texting my roommate to ask him to send help, but I was cut short when I heard 2 pairs of footsteps headed in my direction. This sent me into a panic since I had left a couple of items on the floor. The door to the dressing room was a thin, swinging door with diagonal upward-facing slots so that I could see out to the ceiling, but someone on the outside would only be able to see part of the floor if they tried to peek in. As quickly and quietly as possible, I gathered up everything from the floor and moved it onto the bench. I picked my feet up onto the bench and tried to squeeze myself into the corner. There is a small slot under the door, not enough to fit through, but enough that you could see if someone's feet were on the ground from the other side. I was able to see 2 pairs of shoes walk right past my door while I tried not to breathe. They seemed to go into the back somewhere, so I decided to finish my text message and hope that my roommate would notice and contact the police for me. This is before I knew that some call centers allow you to send a text message to 911 directly, which is now recommended for situations that are too dangerous to talk. I was so nervous as I waited for about 15 minutes while the owner and the robber were somewhere in the back. At no point during this experience was I ever comfortable, but there was a point where I kind of got used to the situation and my heart rate seemed to slow down a little bit. Then, out of nowhere, this came from the back of the store. Because this happened after several minutes of complete silence, I nearly had a heart attack when it happened and fell off the bench. I was praying that the other robber didn't hear that because I was convinced that the store owner was dead and I would be next if they found out about me. The robber then walked back past my changing room. Do it. No, please. I sat there in shock, thinking that I might be the lone survivor of this crime with any luck. But whatever hope I did have was dashed when I heard what he said next. Check the rest of the store. I didn't dare move a muscle as I heard the 2 men methodically taking apart the rest of the store. I thought back to when the store owner had let me into the changing room, how he had unlocked the door to let me go in. I thought maybe, just maybe, that they would assume that the doors are locked at all times and leave it be, But again, my head started burning when I saw a figure standing right outside my door through the slots, trying to peek inside. He tried the door handle and started loudly banging on the door. Anybody in there? Open up. He then starts throwing himself against the door like a madman. I can literally see the door breaking off its hinges before my eyes. It's not going to take much more abuse when, finally, I hear the guy yell out, "Let's go," and they both run for the exit. The rest of the night was pretty much a blur to me. I remember the police arriving, me being marched back through the store, seeing police and ambulance lights, seeing the bloody mess made along the wall, probably from that first customer. I was taken in for questioning. I probably wasn't very helpful, considering that I never saw their faces. As far as I know, neither of them were ever caught. It's pretty obvious to me why they decided to steal from a small costume shop just before Halloween, but I still wonder why they felt the need to kill. Especially someone in my position who didn't even see their faces. I've had many nightmares about the incident and have struggled to get the idea out of my head ever since. I've tried talking to therapists and friends about the situation, and people have come up with their own theories. The best, and probably most haunting theory that I've heard so far, came from a witness who worked at a nearby restaurant and was getting off his shift around the time that I was in the costume store that night. After hearing about what happened in the news, he theorized that the two criminals didn't do it for the money, but rather did it for the thrill. I don't know if there's any truth to this, but he said he noticed two men in tuxedos walk into the shop, wearing animal masks.
Number 3. Heartbreaker.
The stereotypical version of Valentine's Day has always gotten on my nerves. For one, the ads never show gay couples, and I tend to get asked out by guys who don't believe I'm actually gay. This year wasn't different by much. I had to sit through class, which I spent texting my girlfriend, Amy, going over our plans for the night. Our LGBTQ friends were having a dinner party, and we agreed to go. As I was getting up to leave after class, one of the guys walked over to me. I don't know who he is. He's one of the quiet guys who sits in the back. He handed me a heart-shaped note reading, "Will you be mine?" I sighed, noticing his friend nervously watching in the back. Obviously, his friend was asking. "Sorry, but I have a girlfriend." I tried to be nice about it. He went back to his friend, and I could feel a cold glare following me. I'm used to guys being rude, so I shrugged it off. I went home and got ready for the night. It felt like something was staring at me from outside and in the shadows. The feeling came back on and off throughout the night. The party was amazing. Lots of laughs and booze. Everyone was intoxicated, especially Amy. As I drove her home, there was a car following us. I could feel my hair standing on end. Every time we passed an intersection, I would look back to see if it would turn. It finally turned when we were 2 blocks from Amy's. I helped her inside, and she complained constantly that it was hot in her apartment, so I opened the window a bit. Most people would have made out and proceeded to make love to their partner at this point, but I have more dignity than that. I gave her a kiss goodnight and left. It was strangely quiet on my way home. The feeling of being followed was finally gone, replaced by an uneasy feeling in my gut. Maybe the alcohol was finally kicking in. I got back to my dorm and cracked the window open. The night air felt good on my warm face and soothed my upset stomach. I decided to take a shot of whiskey before going to bed. As I laid there, I thought I could hear the door rattle. It was probably my imagination. The shot I took couldn't have hit me that hard. Then again, that's also probably the alcohol. I wasn't sure, but I thought I could see the shadow of feet from underneath the door. I could have sworn something hit the window, but it was probably just the wind. The morning light hit my eyes, and the onset of a hangover made my head throb. The slight smell of blood made me groan. It shouldn't be that time. Yet. I got up just to make sure. Instead of the expected, the rug felt wet under my feet, and I discovered a heart on the floor. There was a knife through it and blood staining my rug. My heart was pounding as the metallic smell flooded my senses. The breath caught in my throat and my stomach twisted. I got up and rushed to the bathroom. The shock of it all made me sick, literally. I took a moment to drink some water after painfully emptying the contents of my stomach, hoping to ease the sense of dread gnawing it. I went back, pausing outside my door. It had been a long time since I last prayed, and right now, I was praying that it was nothing. Praying that it was a delusion. I opened the door, and it was still there. I couldn't stop myself from gagging, and that's when I saw the writing. The wall had blood smeared on it, reading, "Now you can be mine." The police came, and they couldn't find any evidence of forced entry. No trace of who did it was left behind. I found out that the heart belonged to Amy, and it was determined that they entered through the window. I'm not sure how anyone could climb 3 stories from the outside of the building, but now I never leave the window open at night. It's been 2 years now, and I even moved to a different city because of rumors that I killed Amy. A new start was supposed to be a good thing, until I found a heart-shaped note under my door reading, "You're mine."
Number 4. I found some disturbing pictures in my child's backpack.
My wife and I first decided to send our daughter, Ella, to preschool when my wife went back to school to get her nursing degree. Ella was about 4 years old at the time, and we were primarily concerned that she would have a hard time fitting in, since all the other kids in the class had been together for a couple years already at that point. The first couple of weeks went off without a hitch, or at least we didn't notice any issues until one afternoon in September when Ella wasn't feeling well and went to bed right after we picked her up from school. She had her backpack dumped right next to the door, and my wife commented on the fact that it was surprisingly heavy considering how small of a bag it was. We were curious about what exactly they had given her that would make the backpack so heavy, so we decided to pop it open and take a look. All that we had given her when she started preschool were the basics: pencils, markers, crayons, a pad of paper, extra clothes, perhaps a couple other things that I'm forgetting right now. But the point is, we were very surprised to see what we found in the backpack. It was filled to the brim with loose papers. It was a complete mess, almost as if she had just stuffed the backpack full of paper, one sheet at a time. There must have been hundreds of sheets in there, if not more. The strangest thing is, Ella had never really been a very messy child. She keeps her room clean for the most part, and she's the kind of girl who never really likes to get her hands messy. Naturally, my wife and I emptied out the backpack and tried to sort through the mess. What we found were mostly drawings, the typical stuff you would expect from a young girl, with the grass at the bottom and the sun in the top corner of the page. Most of the drawings had 3 characters, who I can only assume are supposed to be Ella, my wife, and I. Most were repeats or some variation of this basic formula. The 3 of us standing in front of a house, the 3 of us standing in flowers, at the beach, etc., etc. Not all the pages were drawings. Some of them just contained black crayon scribbles all over the place. It looked almost as if she was trying to color the page black. I remember doing that when I was bored in school as a kid as well, so I wasn't too concerned. Until I saw that there were more of them. Subsequent pages contained less black scribbles and more white space, and all of the lines seemed to be completely random from what I could tell. We said something about getting her a bigger folder and continued to sift through our daughter's drawings for a while until my wife got a call and I got hungry and went to go grab something from the fridge. After that, the issue never really came up again for the next month or so. We got busy with life and, well, if you have kids, you know how parenting can be. Anyways, one afternoon in October, I was in Ella's room getting her ready for bed when she had to use the restroom, so I continued to sit in there and wait for her when I noticed another messy stack of papers. We have a little table set up in her room that she can use for her arts and crafts, and once again, there was a huge surplus of drawings pouring out of her backpack. I was starting to wonder if they do anything else at this preschool of hers besides free time to color, when I noticed something strange. There was a new character added to the family portrait, and he looked disturbing, to say the least. He was a tall, slim, bald man wearing long white robes. This figure was completely devoid of any color, except for the eyes and mouth, which were scribbled in a dark red. It looked like she had jammed the crayon into the page as hard as she could to produce the eyes and mouth, resulting in a much more intense pigment in those areas. Other than that, this character and the areas surrounding his outline were the only parts of the page that were completely colorless. What was even more disturbing was the fact that this character and my wife were frowning, while Ella and I both had huge smiles on our faces. It just didn't sit well with me. I continued to look through her drawings and found that this fourth person was in every drawing. As I flipped through them, I noticed this guy seemed to be staring at my wife. In some of the drawings, he seemed to be standing behind her. I was legitimately creeped out by this, but told myself that it must be an imaginary friend or something. I continued to flip through the pages and ended up coming across more of those black scribbles, but these ones were what I can really only describe as more violent, more intense. It was the same thing where it looked like she had mashed the crayon into the page. To this point, I was able to look past what I had seen, but what I saw next gave me a deep pit in my stomach. She had drawn pictures of my wife laying at the bottom of the ocean. Her eyes were scribbled out in black crayon, and she was wearing a huge frown. To my own dismay, this wasn't the only drawing like this. She had drawn the same picture over and over and over. My jaw hung agape as I tried to comprehend what I was looking at when I realized that my wife was in the bath right now. Ella had probably gone into that same bathroom. Before I could react, I heard a cold voice from behind.
What are you doing?
I turned to see Ella standing at the door. I tried asking her about the pictures, but she just refused to talk about it and climbed into bed. This wasn't just a case of kids will be kids. She had a most serious tone about her. Thankfully, my wife didn't mention that anything had happened while they were in the bathroom, but we were unable to get Ella to respond to any of our questions about the pictures. Now, we're considering seeking professional help.
Number 5. The Scarecrow.
I'll always remember 7th grade Halloween as one of the last good, innocent years of trick-or-treating with my friends before the paradigm shift to haunted houses, parties, slutty costumes, boys, and alcohol. I'll also remember it, though, for one other reason that I haven't been able to erase from my mind since that night. I remember that day. It was Friday, so almost everyone wore their costumes to school. Jane, Margaret, and I had decided to go as the Powerpuff Girls, even though the show was long since irrelevant at the time. Jane was Bubbles, Margaret went as Buttercup, and I, being the only one without the correct hair color, wore a red wig to become Blossom. During homeroom, everyone was showing off their costumes. One of our guy friends, Chris, was the only one who didn't wear his costume to school. Chris was one of the more popular guys that we knew, so I found it kind of strange that he hadn't dressed up. When Margaret asked him why he didn't wear a costume, he just told us that we'd have to stop by his place tonight if we wanted to see his costume. We got the idea that whatever he was wearing was obviously too graphic to be brought to school, and made plans to swing by and check it out sometime that evening. By the time we made it to Chris's house, it was starting to get pretty late, and I figured we had about an hour or so of trick-or-treating left before we had to call it a night. We were a bigger group of girls now, probably 6 or 7 of us, all in costume. His house didn't seem to have much in terms of decoration, just a few of those Halloween store cobwebs you see on the porch, and a scarecrow sitting on the bench near the front door. Someone rang the bell and Chris's mom showed up, dressed in regular clothes with a witch hat, which I'm pretty sure she wore on multiple years. As we picked out candy, Margaret asked if Chris was home, but his mom told us that he had gone out to scare some trick-or-treaters with a couple friends. I was the last one in line to take a piece of candy, so I thanked her, and we went on our way. As we walked back to the sidewalk, I felt something behind me tug on my wig, pulling it off my head a little bit. I looked back and screamed when I saw the Scarecrow standing just a couple inches behind me. A couple of the girls let out screams as well when they turned around and noticed the Scarecrow had moved from the bench and snuck up behind us. Margaret seemed to be the first one to come to realization that it was Chris, who had dressed up and waited for us inside the Scarecrow. When Jane asked how long he had to wait there, he didn't say anything, and just stared at us, which admittedly made me a little bit uncomfortable, but I tried not to show it, not wanting to give the known prankster any satisfaction. I guess he didn't want to break character, because even as we invited him to come trick-or-treat at a few more houses, he remained silent for the rest of the time. Jane and I poked fun at him, trying too hard to be Mr. Creepy Mysterious, trying to get him to crack or laugh or something. But it didn't work. He just followed us from house to house for another block or so until we all decided to go back to my house and hang out for a while. He would occasionally tug on my wig, but I tried not to react, because I knew that was exactly what he wanted. So we stayed up late, seeing as how tomorrow was a Saturday, and we could sleep in as long as we wanted. One of the girls went home, but the rest of us, and Chris, stayed up to watch a scary movie, which ended up not being so scary. Chris didn't even seem to want to watch the movie. He just stared at us the entire time. I knew he was just trying to freak me out, so I ignored him and tried to pay attention to the movie. I was bored and fell asleep about 20 minutes in. When I woke up, it was around 3 in the morning and everyone else passed out on the couch. Chris, however, was gone. I figured that he wouldn't be able to mess with us anymore and walked home. When we got back to school on Monday, we confronted Chris about his little stunt on Halloween. He got this confused expression on his face and told us that his family didn't own a scarecrow, or a scarecrow costume, and that he had been out all evening trick-or-treating with his friends. He even showed us a picture of his group, with him wearing a Jeff the Killer costume. He seemed to have no idea what we were talking about when we brought up the scarecrow. A couple of his friends even served as his alibis, saying that they were with Chris the entire night. To this day, I don't know if this was an elaborate prank, or if some stranger actually followed us around all night. But what really bothers me most to think about is the possibility that this guy came into my house, and after all of us were asleep, left without taking anything or saying a word. I've never seen that particular scarecrow costume again, and to this day, I've never gotten Chris to admit that he was behind it.
Number 6. My sleep paralysis amplified. I started my new job a few days ago. Well, to be entirely accurate, it's not a new job. I just got transferred to another branch, in another time zone. My doctor says that the stress of having a new job, new schedule, and new life are all probably contributing to my severe sleep issues and hallucinations I've been having. Okay, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let me take a step back. My name is Alex. I'm 28 years old and single. I work for a pretty sizable company that sells consumer and professional grade amplifiers to musicians. I'm the guy who makes sure you actually get the thing you ordered and get it on time. It was recently decided that it would be a good idea for people like me to be close to the people who are selling these products. Why they didn't realize that in the first place, beyond me. But recently I found myself packing up and moving across the country. So I was kind of annoyed about the whole relocation thing for the first 10 minutes at the new office. I was supposed to be meeting some of these salespeople who I would now be working alongside. Enter Caitlin, luminescent light brown eyes, short but not too short brunette hair, dimples to die for. I quickly got over any annoyance I had with having to move and started to think I was going to like this new office. By the end of the first day, Caitlin and I already had at least 3 inside jokes. See, I told you the copy machine outsmarted Lenny, I told her as I headed out for the day. Don't worry, you're not supposed to get it. It's one of our inside jokes. She laughed and told me she'd see me tomorrow. She had such a cute laugh. Sorry, I got distracted there for a second. At the end of the day, I was exhausted, famished. I was so eager to retire to bed. But when I laid down and shut my eyes, I just couldn't fall asleep. I kept opening my eyes and looking at the clock. 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 2:30. Why wasn't I falling asleep? Was it this new bed? Was it this new apartment? I looked around my new pad and thought about how funny it was that I still always close my bedroom door despite being the only one here now. Old habits do die hard, I suppose. Maybe I couldn't sleep because I was thinking too much. Maybe Caitlin was on my mind too. Eventually, at some point, I must have dozed off. But when I awoke, it was still dark out. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the clock. 4:23 in the morning. I was feeling pretty thirsty, so I hopped up to grab some water. Only, when I hopped up to grab some water, my body didn't move an inch. Come to think of it, I hadn't moved at all since I'd woken up. I immediately felt a wave of terror crash over me. What was going on? Why can't I move? What's wrong with me? I was instantly overcome with anxiety and discomfort. It was like a nightmare where nothing happens. But it was a nightmare because nothing was happening. What if I was stuck like this forever? Who will think to come check on me? What if I starve to death like this? What if... The next thing I remember was me waking up the next morning. To my relief, I was able to get up and hit the alarm clock now. What was that last night? Some kind of weird dream? Or was it real? It felt real, but it doesn't seem real. I brought my own lunch to work that day. I opened up the fridge to find it's completely stuffed. I couldn't find an open spot anywhere, so I start to rearrange stuff to make room.
What are you doing?
I hear from behind me. I turn to see this guy, Jerry, standing there. Jerry is the head of the sales department. Every office has that guy, right? From what I could tell so far in my one day here, Jerry is the guy who makes you want to take the stairs when you see him waiting for the elevator. And I might be speaking from experience already. I was just...
Why do you have my food in your hand?
He asked in the most accusatory manner I've ever heard in my life. He snatched the bag from me. I was just trying to make space so that I could fit my lunch.
Yeah, okay.
He walked away. Hey, no complaint from me. Now I had a spot to put my lunch in. Throughout the day, I made sure to visit Caitlin and make sure she wasn't overworking herself. Sometimes people forget to take little breaks. I was just looking out for my fellow employee. The lack of sleep the night before had me all worn out. I was positive that this time I would have no trouble whatsoever with passing out. I shut my bedroom door behind me and literally collapsed on my bed. I continued to lie awake for a while though. I looked at my clock periodically. 11:17, 12:03, 12:15, 12:17. I was growing restless. I guess at some point though, I knocked out because a couple of hours later, I woke up in the middle of the night again. Great. I tried to look at the clock, but I couldn't see it from the position I was in. That's when I realized it had happened again. I couldn't move. Once again, I was overcome with fear. Was this going to become a regular thing? However, what I saw next was about to take my fear and amplify it. My door was open and this creature was standing in the doorway. It was humanoid, but its body was all pitch black, and it was probably 7 or 8 feet tall. Its head was shaped like the top of a tree stump that had been struck by lightning, and its eyes were glowing red. Its mouth opening represented a polygon with completely random angles, but the scariest part to me, for whatever reason, was its fingers. Each one was long and branch-like, probably about 2 feet in length. They were just dangling there, and it was moving them around in a wave motion. I tried to move, I tried to scream, but what I found is that I could not even do that. It started to pace towards my bed. I could not even describe to you the motion it used to walk. It reached the foot of the bed. I was fighting with every ounce of energy I had, but my body would not budge. It came along the side of the bed and continued to inch closer to me. I tried to scream for help and just managed to get out the slightest sound. Help! I screamed out as I sat up. It was morning. Again, I was left with the mystery of what this sleep paralysis was. I decided it was time to see a doctor about it and made an appointment for after work. I wasn't going to let my rough night ruin my perfect day, however. Today, I had a plan. When I got to work, Jerry was waiting for the elevator. I smoothly redirected myself towards the stairs, and I could almost feel him sneering at my back. By the time I made it up the stairs, Jerry was talking to Caitlin about something. Luckily, I saw him walk away as I walked up. I stopped and said hello to Caitlin. She flashed her infectious smile at me. Sure, I was tired, but things were going well. I didn't bring my lunch to work today. Instead, when it got to my break time, I went over to Caitlin's desk and invited her to go grab some food with me. She delightfully accepted. We got sandwiches, and we totally hit it off. We were talking and cracking jokes the entire time. She does this little thing where she'll get excited about something and kind of bite her lip. It's incredible. We got back to the office and she offered me a mint from her drawer. I accepted, so she went to open the little box of mints and accidentally spilled a bunch of them on her desk. We both reached for the loose mints. I saw my chance and grabbed her hand and held it in mine. "Here, relax, I'll take care of this," I told her, and used my other hand to gather the mints.
What's going on here?
I heard the stern voice that belonged to Jerry as he walked up. She quickly pulled her hands away. I finished gathering up the mints, and after taking one for myself, deposited the rest back in the container. I was taken aback by what she said next. She told him, "Hey babe, we just got back from lunch." My heart sank deep into my chest, and my head started burning up. Did my ears deceive me? Did she really just call Jerry, the prick of the office, and her boss, babe? Surely this must be a joke, a cruel meme of some kind. He came up behind her and kissed the top of her head, crushing whatever hope I had left and glaring at me as he did so. I couldn't believe it. How is this idiot better than me? I felt myself starting to blush. I felt so stupid thinking she was into me. She was just being friendly. How did I not see this coming? I gotta get back to work. She thanked me for my company at lunch. As I turned away, I could feel his glare on me so strongly that I wish I'd worn sunscreen.
You went out to lunch with that guy.
I heard him ask her with an attitude as I fled the scene. Great. 3 days and I was already making enemies. The rest of my afternoon was so hard to get through. I was constantly dozing off at my desk. Not enough to fully fall asleep, mind you, just enough to feel about as miserable as I felt rejected. I wanted to just go home and sleep, but I had my doctor's appointment that evening. The doc confirmed what I pretty much already knew. I had sleep paralysis. 1 in every 12 people get it or something. He questioned me about my lifestyle, and when he found out I had just made a big move, he was almost positive that was the reason for my issues. Psychological stress and abnormal sleep cycles are apparently the 2 biggest factors that usually contribute to it. He told me that the hallucinations are a common symptom. Basically, my body thinks it's asleep while it's awake. I was supposed to see a psychiatrist if the problem persisted once I'd settled into my new routine. Not exactly the treatment I was hoping for, but it was somewhat reassuring that he expected me to recover on my own. That night, I actually had a better time falling asleep than before. I must have been out by 11 or 12, but that didn't stop me from waking up in the middle of the night again, unable to move, unable to speak. Officially knowing that I suffered from sleep paralysis didn't make the experience any less scary. When you have it, it feels like you're never gonna wake up from it. And the things you see feel incredibly real, and you feel incredibly helpless. That's why I wanted to scream when I saw a knife-wielding silhouette in my doorframe. The man stepped forward and caught a little bit of moonlight, just enough for me to identify who it was. Jerry. As per usual, he did not look happy to see me. He tiptoed across the room to the foot of my bed and stared me down with disgust. He continued to look at me for about 2 full minutes. His body was trembling. Finally, he came around to the side of the bed, taking an almost identical path to the creature from the night before. He raised the knife in the air, gripping it so hard I could see the loss of circulation to his fingers. He froze in that position, almost like he was waiting for me to make the first move. I couldn't take it. The anxiety was killing me. I just wanted him to do it already and get it over with. The last thing I could remember, though, was him stuck in that position, trembling like a maniac. Morning came. I turned off my alarm clock, and the post-nightmare relief felt incredible as it dawned on me. I actually felt pretty decent for once. Not back to where I was before the move, but not 100% exhausted either. It was Friday, so I thought maybe I'd have the energy to go out into town and explore my new city after work tonight. Maybe it would help get my mind off things. I hopped out of bed, and as I began to get dressed, I realized something. Something that flushed whatever optimism or relief I had away. Something that made my body and legs lock up just as they had the 2 previous nights. Something that made my heart sink deep into my chest just as it had when I found out about Caitlin and Jerry. What I realized was my bedroom door was open.
Number 7. Play with me.
Are you awake? Why are you hiding? I don't mean you any harm. I know it's late, but I want to play. You haven't picked me up for nearly a month. I want to have tea with you again. I promise not to spill. I didn't know it was hot, and I'm sorry it ruined your favorite shirt. I'm happy to have tea and eat biscuits with you today. Your eyes are beautiful with that dress. I wish I had such lovely eyes. Don't turn away from me. Why are you ignoring me? Is it because you don't love me like your other dolls? No, don't put me away. I didn't mean anything by it. Please love me. I'm not as pretty as your other dolls, but I want affection too. Don't leave me here. Do my cries and scratches in the night scare you? If you take me out one more time, we can play a game. It'll be easy, I promise. Please don't fret. I only want to play with you. We can be best friends forever. I'll never leave you. I thought you were lonely. Isn't that why you have so many dolls? You hugged me and loved me. Now why do you hate me? We had lots of fun together. Is my hair too knotted? Or my dress too dirty? I know it's late, but will you play with me? One last time? I hate seeing you cry. We can play hide and seek. You hide and I'll seek. If you win, you can do whatever you want with me, and I promise to behave. If I win, then you have to play with me when I want to play. I'm glad you're letting me out to play this time. I promise not to disappoint. Don't worry, I won't peek. Not one bit. Be quick though. 1, 2, 3, 6, 10. Ready or not, I'm coming for you. Where are you? Are you in the closet? I thought I heard a door close. No? Okay. Perhaps you went downstairs. I can't wait to find you. Did you go all the way to the basement? Careful. You know you're not supposed to play down here. Oh, you chose the dollhouse? The one that was made for us to play in together? I'm happy that you thought of me. Now we can be together forever. Don't worry. No one will find us here. I made sure of that. The door is locked and now it can be us. What's that? You're hungry. We can have another tea party. What do you mean, no? I don't know how long it's been. So why do you keep asking me? You know they can't hear you, so why waste your voice? Wake up! I want you move! Wake up! It's time to play! Why are you so cold? Do you need a blanket? I can find one. Answer me! Why are you ignoring me again? It's been a long time since you moved. It smells like something's rotting. Why did you have to die? Dark and cold. But I won't leave you. I never will.
Number 8. Creepy Clown School Lockdown.
As a kid, I never really understood why some of my classmates were afraid of clowns. I didn't really find them scary. Not that I found them funny either. Most of them just looked kind of goofy and dumb. I remember having this exact argument with my best friend Kevin at the lunch tables in elementary. His argument was always that I needed to see the movie It in order to understand, but being in 2nd grade at the time, my parents would never let me watch it. I actually remember on Halloween, some of the older kids in the neighborhood dressed up as clowns and went around scaring trick-or-treaters. Maybe I just had thick skin, but I remember one of them chasing our entire friend group away, and me being left on the sidewalk laughing at their expense. But anyways, this story takes place in November of that 2nd grade year, just after Halloween. We were sitting in math class, boring as ever. When situations like this arise, which were quite often during math, Kevin and I would meet in the bathroom and trade baseball cards. We had a system. One of us would give the signal and we would stagger our bathroom requests as not to raise suspicion from our teacher.
On this particular occasion, Kevin had gone off to the bathroom first, and I gave it a good 5 minutes before raising my hand. As I was waiting to be called on, our teacher, Mr. Davis, was interrupted by the sound of the intercom, which was strange because they usually only did announcements at the beginning and end of the day.
Attention all students and staff. At this time, we are conducting an internal lockdown. This is not a drill. Please initiate lockdown at this time.
Our teacher was pretty calm with his response, walking over to the door and locking it. He told us all to line up against the back wall and keep quiet as he crossed the room to pull down the blinds. I figured he had been through many lockdown drills before, and this probably wasn't anything big. We had a lockdown at my old school once, and it turned out to be a parent who just forgot to sign in. We waited like that for about 5 minutes. One kid asked Mr. Davis how much longer it would be, and he got a hard shh from our teacher, signaling that no talking would be tolerated. It was about this time when I remembered that Kevin was still in the bathroom. I debated in my head on whether I should bring this to the teacher's attention, but was ultimately too scared after seeing that other kid get scolded for making a peep. That might sound kind of ridiculous given the circumstances, but keep in mind I was only 7 years old at the time, and I was still very intimidated by authority. We waited in silence for a little while longer. With each minute that passed, the situation got more tense. I started to feel anxiety, butterflies in my stomach. That's when there was another announcement on the intercom. This circus music started playing over the intercom, and then after that, there was what sounded like laughter in the background. One of the girls in the class asked Mr. Davis what was going on. He told her to keep quiet, but his voice cracked and he stuttered in saying so. That may have actually been the scariest part of the whole ordeal for me. Being a kid and seeing an adult, and on top of that, someone who you're supposed to feel safe with, being visibly shaken like that, it was terrifying. I guess I wasn't the only one who felt that way. I could hear sniffles coming from one of the other kids like they had been crying. Abruptly, the music just stopped. We were all sitting on the floor in a line in the corner of the room. I actually closed my eyes as if that would somehow help me, but nothing could block out the breathing that I heard blaring over the school intercom. Until it stopped. We sat in silence for a while longer, hearts racing, minds racing faster. The silence was broken by a slam and a group of screams. The sound traveled from down the hall. At this, I opened my eyes to see Mr. Davis jump up and push the big wooden teacher's desk from across the room in front of the door. I noticed tears streaming down his cheeks as he did so. I started to feel sick to my stomach as the anxiety continued to build. Footsteps approached from down the hallway. They stopped near our door. I could see a shadow on the wall. Someone was standing out there. I could tell by the shape that it was the shadow of a clown. After a short pause, it seemed like the shadow had disappeared, and I started to feel a little bit of relief that the clown had walked away. There was a bang on the door, and suddenly, standing at the door window, was a terrifying-looking clown with bright white face paint, a huge cartoony, toothy smile painted on his face to contrast the cold, evil-looking smirk on his actual lips. He was somewhat overweight and wore a big, baggy clown suit. The whole class screamed as he repeatedly tried to open the door. He went from trying to wiggle the doorknob free to rearing back and trying to kick in the wooden door, the class screaming each time he did so. It realistically didn't last too long before he gave up and moved on, but it felt like forever to me at the time. That was the last we saw of the mysterious lockdown clown. But in all of the hysteria, I completely forgot about Kevin. The lockdown lasted for another 20 minutes or so until each room was cleared. They made the announcement over the intercom, telling us the lockdown was over and teachers could resume classes. They didn't actually ever say what happened, probably not wanting to raise any panic. A few minutes later, Kevin appeared at the door and looked like an absolute wreck. His hair was literally standing up on end. He had dark circles around his eyes and tears streaming down his face. His entire body was shaking. I'd never seen someone looking so disheveled. Class was once again interrupted so that our teacher could escort Kevin to the nurse. He didn't come back to class after that, and his parents ended up holding him out of school for a full 3 weeks to recover. He came back just before winter break. I asked him what happened a couple of times, but he always just told me that he didn't want to talk about it. He ended up coming to school for the rest of second semester before his family moved away at the start of that summer. He was just never quite the same after that. We never got an official story on what had happened, only a swirl of rumors that the intruder had never actually been found. I shuddered to think about what would have happened if Mr. Davis hadn't pushed the desk up along the door. Anyways, I remembered about this story all these years later because I oftentimes cut through this park on the way home from the bus station. They had a carnival going on over the weekend. It was closed now, but it was about 2 a.m. as I cut through the fairground. One of the ticket booths had a light that had been left on, the only light in the entirety of the area for that matter. And that's when I saw a clown crash up against the glass and stare at me with those wide eyes. It may have been just some teenagers or YouTubers pulling a prank, but I ran as fast as I could and didn't stop until I was locked inside of my room, because clowns terrify me now. Number 9. Jason.
This is a story that took place 6 months ago, when my first son Elliot had just turned 5 years old. Jason was first introduced into our lives when we decided to hold off sending Elliot to kindergarten. Since his birthday was so close to the cutoff, we decided it would be best for him to go start school as one of the older kids in class as opposed to the youngest. So when he started talking to Jason, we felt we had made the right decision. Jason is Elliot's imaginary friend. I can't imagine how the other kindergartners would have reacted to the idea of an imaginary friend, so it seemed like starting a bit later would give him time to go through this phase and be ready for school next fall. The first time I can remember hearing about Jason was one evening just as we were finishing up dinner. Elliot had requested to take some food up to his room to give to Jason. Juliana inquisitively asked him who Jason was, to which he replied, "My friend who lives in the closet upstairs." Juliana granted him permission to take the rest of his food up as long as he promised to come clean the dish before he went off to bed. I shot her a look, but she, being the free-willed spirit that she is, ignored me until Elliot had run up the steps. I don't think it was a good idea to encourage that kind of behavior, but she assured me that having an imaginary friend was totally normal, and that it would be a good idea to humor him until he was ready to grow out of it on his own. Hesitantly, I agreed, and eventually I would talk to Elliot about Jason on a day-to-day basis. Eventually, I learned how to use Jason to my advantage. For example, when Elliot didn't want to get in the car to go to the dentist, I would tell him that Jason said he wanted to go to the dentist and that Elliot should come. At times, Elliot would hardly mention Jason at all. Other times, it seemed that Jason was all he wanted to talk about. One time, we caught him taking snacks from the kitchen and he claimed that they were for Jason. Juliana wisely let this slide and later told me that if this was the only way that we could get Elliot to eat, it was okay with her. And after many long battles at the dinner table, I was quick to agree. I would oftentimes hear Elliot in his room talking to Jason, and I wondered how long this phase would last. At one point, I asked him what Jason looked like, and he told me that he wore a black snow hat and had a long fuzzy beard. I was taken off guard by this, since I had always imagined that Elliot's idea of Jason was a kid his age. I brought this up with Juliana and she assured me that it was perfectly normal for a kid to have an adult as an imaginary friend. After all, we are both adults and he spends most of his time with us, so it makes sense that he would see an adult as his friend. She even said that her younger sister had an imaginary friend as a kid who was supposedly an old man named Vin, which she thinks is a result of them having spent a lot of time at their grandparents' house back then. I had never had an imaginary friend or any siblings, so I just had to take my wife's word on all of this. That is, until one day that changed everything and still makes me paranoid. We have just gotten back from the Italian restaurant, one of the only decent places that we can get Elliot to eat at on a constant basis. We parked in the driveway and decided to go for a short walk since it was pretty nice out that evening. Normally we come into the house through the garage, but since we had gone for a walk, we entered in the front door on this occasion. As we were taking our shoes off, I heard what I thought the sound of a cough coming from upstairs. I turned to Juliana, wondering if she had heard it too. She looked pale and shocked as she asked me in a panic, "What was that?" This was probably loud enough that if someone was upstairs they might hear. Elliot told us that it was probably just Jason. I told my wife and son to stay put and I went to investigate. When I got upstairs and went into Elliot's room, the light was on and the window was open. I searched the entire house but was unable to find anything. The windows from Elliot's room leads onto a section of the roof that is pretty high up, but not impossible to jump down from. We later interrogated Elliot to see if he had left the window open, but he swore he couldn't remember. We tried to get him to tell us if Jason was real, but it was a delicate situation. We didn't want to scare him for life, but we didn't want him to be in danger either. Of course, at his age, I don't think he fully understood the difference between real and pretend yet. We did end up calling the police, and I half expected them to find the proof that someone was living in the closet, but they couldn't find any DNA that didn't belong to Elliot anywhere in the room. Elliot made friends with a couple kids on the block, and he never really brings up Jason anymore. But it truly chills me to think that someone could have been in our house talking to our son, in his room while he slept, possibly using him to sneak food up, and to be honest, who knows what else. Now I check all the upstairs rooms every night before bed, including the closets and under the bed. I try to do it when Elliot is not in the room so he doesn't get to thinking. He'll be starting school in fall, and I doubt we'll really have any confirmation on whether Jason was just an imaginary friend or not until he's a little bit older. Juliana and I have a second child on the way now though, so I really hope we find out sooner rather than later.
Number 10. Christina Grimmie, Final Goodbye.
I've always been strangely fascinated by tragedy. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not like I'm happy that terrible things happen. I certainly don't encourage terrorism or anything, but I have spent many nights on the weird side of YouTube, studying 9/11 videos or watching houses get swept away by Hurricane Katrina. I think we all have a small tendency for our eyes to be drawn to the morbid. Just look at how drivers stare at the wreckage during a highway traffic accident and, in turn, slow down the traffic themselves. I also think that our curiosity with such things as a culture is related to our love for ghost towns. I always think it's amazing when a place that once had so much buzz and attention becomes barren and empty so quickly. Sometimes tragedy and ghost towns can go hand in hand. Just look at Pompeii or Chernobyl. One night in late 2016, I found a similar example, a virtual ghost town, if you will. While browsing YouTube at 3 in the morning before going to bed, I stumbled upon a video from Christina Grimmie. Christina was a YouTube singer who was tragically shot and killed just after her concert in Orlando back in June. This was a truly sad and scary time for her fans and the community. Christina was just 22 years old, and she was one of the first big YouTubers to pass away. Since she posted so regularly, I imagine fans were left with a much bigger hole in their lives as compared to other celebrity deaths. As I clicked through some of her videos and read some of the comments, I could see that many of her fans saw her as a friend and were torn apart at her death. She even used to refer to her fan base as her friend base. I came to think that I would have been friends with her too. I hadn't heard about Christina until after her untimely death, but in looking at some of her other content, I started to see what the big deal was. She was a beautiful girl with a beautiful voice. She was a self-proclaimed Legend of Zelda nerd, and she even had a Death Note tattoo. I imagine we would have gotten along very well had we known each other. Naturally, I did quite a bit of digging, watching videos and reading comments. There was a lot of pain carried on that page, but in a way, her channel was a lot like a ghost town. Sure, there are still occasional posts from her manager, including a memorial video and some pre-recorded music videos, but for the most part, it was a ghost channel. In many ways, it served as a memorial, with people leaving their condolences on her discussion page. Most of the comments were fangirls talking about how much they miss her, with the occasional "why couldn't it have been Keemstar" comment. But by far, the most interesting thing to me is looking at those videos uploaded right before her death, some of her final recorded moments on camera, and seeing people's reactions now that she's gone. I don't really know what it is. I feel bad for her and her fans, but these videos just captivate my attention.
This led me to start looking at some of the tribute videos that have been made in her honor, and it's here that I stumbled upon a playlist called Christina Grimmie Unlisted. So I guess that Christina got her start by doing mostly covers, and some of them have since been struck down because of copyright, while others were switched to private or unlisted. In fact, most of the videos on this playlist couldn't be watched because they were changed to private, but the rest of them were just unlisted. But what caught my attention was one unlisted video titled Final Goodbye in all caps, with a thumbnail of Christina waving at the camera. The video was about 5 minutes long, as I recall, and of course, I clicked on it to see exactly what this final goodbye video was. Less than 1 second into the video, I was shocked with what I saw. It was a video of Christina in her room, only her face was covered in what looked like blood, and she was crying her eyes out as she talked. It looked like she had been sobbing for hours. She was holding the camera and recording herself, and it was basically just shaking all over the place. My first thought was that this was some kind of Halloween or April Fool's prank that she had done, but I looked at the date of the video and it said it was uploaded today, which was obviously impossible. I was in complete shock. It had only a couple hundred views and started with her barely able to get any words out through all the crying. I can't remember all of her exact words, but she started talking in typical vlog format, save for the fact that she was sobbing through all of it. Hey guys, it's Christina. I just wanted to say thank you for all the love and support that you've given me over the last several months, and I'm sorry that I had to leave you like this. She was coughing and choking on her own words as she spoke. I want you all to be strong. I wish I could stay here with every last one of you. Thank you guys so much for being there and supporting me along the way. You guys were literally the biggest part of me. It was an incredible journey, and I'm so sorry that it had to end this way. I loved going on tour so much because I got to see all of your smiling faces, and no one can take that away from me, no matter what. I just wish that I had gotten one final chance to say goodbye. I guess I wasn't alone, because when I scrolled down to the comments, they were pouring in. Some of them were as shocked as I was, wondering how this was even possible and trying to analyze the situation. Others were just overwhelmingly thankful for her coming back to give them closure. It seemed like all of the comments that I saw were positive ones. I guess because you'd have to be a fan of her to be seeking out the video. Before I got to the end of the video, it stopped playing on its own and I got the familiar "an unknown error has occurred" message. I tried refreshing the page, but it told me that the user had removed the video. I frantically went to her channel to see if it could be found, but it was nowhere. I searched YouTube to see if anyone had re-uploaded it, but it couldn't be found. I even tried to find that Christina Grimmie Unlisted playlist, but it seemed like that was gone too. I was trying to process what had just happened. Had I dozed off and imagined that? I certainly didn't think so. Everything seemed so real. It was so vivid that I still can't get her face in that video out of my head. I was starting to think I had imagined it somehow until I went to her channel and looked at the discussion comments. Several comments had just come in saying things like, thank you for everything. Now, I'm not really sure. Number 11. Wakeup Syndrome.
Do you ever wake up in a hotel or at a friend's house, and for those first few seconds of consciousness, not know exactly where you are? Like, it takes a few moments for you to realize that you aren't in your own bed, that you've gone on vacation, or that you've passed out in a buddy's guest room. This always used to happen to me when I would go away to summer camp as a kid. It would happen during the first week or so. I would wake up thinking I was in my own bed, at least until I opened my eyes and came to the realization that I was in a cabin, miles away from home. That same thing would always happen during those first couple of days home from camp. I would pop out of bed ready to go for a hike or a kayak, only to discover that my mind had been playing tricks on me again. I don't know if there's a proper term for this phenomenon, but I'm sure that anyone who has traveled before probably knows what I'm talking about. When I first started university, I used to get that feeling all the time. I'd imagine I was back at home in high school. Back then, if I slept in too late, Mom would send my sister Tara in to wake me up. And Tara was always the early riser between the two of us. On weekends, you could count on her being up before 9 every day. I was always more of the night owl and preferred to stay up late watching movies and then sleep into around noon or something. But during the school week, as you can imagine, no such snoozing was allowed, and Tara would be sent in to wake me up.
Nathan! Nathan! Wake up! You're gonna miss the bus! Come on, sleepyhead!
Sometimes she would even bring our dog, Miu, to help her out.
Go get him, you!
At around 15 to 20 pounds, Miu was hardly a force to be taken seriously, but what made him such an effective alarm clock was his consistent burning desire for attention. He would jump all the way up onto my bed, run up to the top of my weary body and lick my face until finally I mustered up the stamina to wake up and go get ready for school.
That boy, Mew. Good job, buddy.
The human mind really is an amazing thing, for better or worse. Every week or so during my first term, I would wake up in my dorm thinking I was back and home in my old bed again. I would even hear Tara's words echo in my head before I could peel my eyes open.
Nathan! Wake up, dude! The bus is gonna be here!
Eventually it stopped happening. At least, for the most part. I guess my mind just grew accustomed to the fact that I'd be staying in dorms from now on. But every now and then, it still happens. I'm a sophomore now, and last week, I had visited home for spring break. I got back to school late last night and immediately hit the sack before meeting up with any of my friends. And sure enough, this morning, I awoke with that same old feeling. As I slowly started to wake up, my eyes remained closed as I tried to doze back off to sleep. In my mind, I was home. I even heard my sister's words echoing through my head, just like old times.
Nathan! Wake up! Do you want to make us late?
I groaned and rolled over, trying to ignore the world around me for just a little longer. But as I started to come to, I soon realized it was all in my head, and I was back at university again. Tara was not there, and I could sleep into my heart's content. But then it happened. Once I realized where I was, I started to fall back to sleep, and for a short while, I was relaxed. That's when I felt Miu lick my face.
Number 12. Island Adventure.
A woman at the airport had asked me if I was looking forward to my vacation. To simply say yes would have been an understatement. I had to work overtime for 5 months in order to afford to get here. Then I had to find time off work and get off at the same time as my boyfriend. We had to research the perfect resort on the perfect island with the perfect weather. But we made it. Nothing else was between me, the warm tropical sunshine, a cold, refreshing margarita, and the relaxing sound of waves crashing on the sand in front of me and carelessly rolling back out into the sea. As I dug my toes into the soft sand and laid back on my beach chair, I thought about all the possibilities that awaited us here at the Grand Maritime Beach Resort. Kayaking through the ocean breeze, living the high life at the offshore casino, backpacking the expansive rainforest by moonlight, or regenerating my body at the luxury poolside spa. Maybe I'd even try scuba diving, though I wasn't sure I liked the idea of breathing through a tube. I think before any of that, though, I'd just kick back on the beach and enjoy some sunlight. We'd had a long trip, and it felt good to just drop our bags, slip into a bikini, and take in the saltwater aroma. I could feel myself starting to fade off, too.
Lucy, you okay?
Yeah. I just fell asleep. What time is it?
About 2. You were tired. You look dead.
Thanks.
I was just going up to the bar. Do you want anything to drink?
You could grab me a pina colada, I guess.
Okay.
He kissed me and headed off to the bar. Before I could doze off again, a strange little man came walking down the beach with a clipboard. He looked like one of the locals, a bit of an oddball one at that. He went from chair to chair, making his way up to where I was. When he arrived, he asked if I was interested in going on an island adventure. He explained that it would include backpacking in the rainforest, ziplining, roasting food by a campfire, and bathing in a private waterfall grotto. The clipboard included photos of what looked like an absolutely amazing time to me, so I told him it looked perfect and I wanted to sign my boyfriend and I up for it. He told me to follow him down the beach to the activity shack so I could make a reservation. I dipped my feet in the water as we strolled the length of the shore, but the man kept rushing me along. I didn't think much of it at the time, just assuming he was impatient. That should have been my first of many red flags. Next, we walked off the property of the resort. I asked if the expedition was included in the resort package. He told me it was, and I had no reason to believe otherwise. We finally get down to the little hut. All I remember was it being completely empty and not really looking like an activity shack at all. The guy quickly apologized and told me that the activity director must have already headed up to the site to begin preparing for the excursion. I was starting to get pretty annoyed at this point and told him I better walk back and let my boyfriend know, but he assured me that the site was just across the street and it would only be a couple more minutes. I was reluctant but didn't want to be rude since he insisted. Besides, it would be good for me to get to scope out where we would be exploring. So we made our way inland. I had to run across the street barefoot, no crosswalk. This led us directly into the rainforest, and when we got there, I started to get a bad feeling. There was no set path we were following. He was just leading me deeper into the forest. The other thing that set me off at this point was the complete lack of other tourists. I thought for sure we'd see other couples signing up as well, but scratch that. It wasn't just a lack of other tourists. It was a lack of people. There was nobody out here. Just me and this guy who randomly approached me on the beach. I had no real idea that he actually worked for the resort. He was kind of scraggly and unkempt. Certainly not up to the standards of grooming we had seen at the front desk, but he did look to be an island local like most of the employees we had seen at the resort. And it's not like the island adventure expedition wasn't advertised in the brochures, but something deep inside me said that this wasn't the real thing. I got more and more nervous. I was honestly thinking about turning and running, but the only thing that stopped me from doing it was how embarrassing it would be if this was legit, because there was still some doubt in my mind. Besides, it's not like I'd make it very far with no shoes and no idea where I was going. I debated doing it anyway in my head when something emerged in the distance. Another man was standing out there, veiled by a layer of fog and facing slightly away from us. Relief washed over me when the guy I was with called out to him in another language, and the guy came up to us. Realistically, it was just a couple minutes, just as he had told me back at the activity shack. Before I could feel silly for doubting him, the two men went back and forth in their native tongue. I don't know what they were saying, obviously, but I just know they were talking very quickly. But what was weird was this new guy was staring at me, not making eye contact with the other man. Actually, he wasn't just staring at me. He was eyeing my body, up and down. I felt exposed and uncomfortable, but let's face it, it wasn't the first guy that couldn't keep his eyes off me. It's just that usually they try a little bit to hide it. He continued to fire off questions I couldn't understand. I looked up at the rainforest we'd been exploring. It wasn't exactly as I'd pictured it. How far was the zip line? Where was the waterfall? That's when both of them went quiet. I looked back down at them. Both of them were staring at me. I smiled sheepishly. Then the two men simultaneously grabbed me. I tried to scream, but One of their hands reached over and muffled my mouth, as both of them dragged me down to the ground. I was completely helpless to resist, with the full weight of two bodies crushing me. A hand pinched my nose and closed my nostrils. Tears began to flow, but I couldn't breathe. I was completely powerless. There was nothing I could do. The black started to envelop me from the corners of my vision. Just before I blacked out, I saw something in a blur through my tears, deep in the distance. There was a third person, way back in the trees. It was the last thing I saw before the black crashed in, and I was out. For the second time that day, I awoke in a haze. I thought I never would, but I was alive. It was getting dark out, but we were still in the forest. A different part of the forest. I didn't know how deep in we were. I actually couldn't make out much. My vision was a blur. It was like looking through beer goggles. My right arm felt dead, almost impossible to lift, but with some effort I could move it around and shoo off some of the hundreds of bugs flying right over my body. It didn't do much good. They were everywhere. The two men were sitting by a campfire talking. Clearly they hadn't noticed me wake up. From what I could tell, they were about 10 meters away. There was also a jeep parked nearby too. I felt as if I was hungover and drunk at the same time, but this was my only chance to try to escape, and I knew it. There were just a few problems. I had no idea where I was, how far we were from the beach or from any civilization for that matter. I was not in much condition to run. I still had no shoes, and my bikini was not great for running in to begin with. Normally, I might be more confident. I do jog for 45 minutes almost every day, so I had pretty good endurance. I didn't know what these two men were capable of, though. And then there was that third guy I had seen in the distance. Where was he? Was he one of them? Was he going to be patrolling the perimeter? Before I could think of a plan, I saw them turn their back to me and go to the car. This was my chance. I wobbled to my feet. I didn't break into a full sprint right away, trying to strike a balance between speed and stealth. As I got further from the campfire, it got very dark. Even just a few meters ahead of me was starting to look pitch black. It wasn't long before I stepped on something hard and rough. It rolled me off my feet and I went crashing to the ground. Shoot. I heard their yelling out in the distance as they realized I was gone. I pulled myself to my feet, feeling even woozier than before. I heard the jeep start somewhere in the background. The headlights flared up behind me, so I scrambled my way up the nearest bump in the terrain and ducked out behind it, doing my best not to move a muscle. The area lit up as the vehicle turned around and headed in my direction. It pretty much mowed over the low-lying vegetation as it tore over the bumpy terrain and headed straight for me. They didn't see me. The jeep passed and I was safe for a little while longer. I figured I'd have to develop a strategy so I could continue in one direction as to not send myself in circles. I decided to go perpendicular to the way they had just driven. That way, if they tried to comb the area, it will take them a long time to get to me. I got to my feet and set off, but then I heard something that stopped me in my tracks. It wasn't loud. I wasn't even entirely sure I had heard it at all, until I heard it again. There were footsteps, probably a good 30 meters or so. My head was still spinning and I couldn't exactly tell which direction they were coming from. Once again, I had to reassess my situation. I looked around. Absolutely no light, other than the faint moon's glow. I couldn't make out where the footsteps were coming from, or who they were coming from. What if only one of them had gotten in the car? Or could this be that third person I had seen in the distance? It could be a random person for all I knew. It might be worth calling out for help, but if it was one of them... I didn't have time to sit and think about it. The footsteps were getting louder. I decided to try and quietly move away. It was getting harder to get around though. Not only was it dark, but my vision was swirling more and more. It seemed like the more ground I covered, the louder the other footsteps got. The anxiety, the swirling headache, the sick feeling I had, all of it was getting to me. Before I knew what had happened, I collapsed. I laid on the ground, breathing heavily. The last thing I saw this time was a pair of boots on the ground in front of me. They walked up and stopped just before my face. I couldn't go on. I felt myself start to fade once again.
Number 13. International Waters.
Molly, come on! They're leaving! I called back my wife as she waddled down the dock in her high heels. What's the point? I thought to myself. We were going to miss it. It was already 3 minutes past 2. The boat should have left by now. Sure enough, just as we got to the end of the dock, the ship pulled away and headed out to sea. If only she hadn't taken so long to get ready.
Oh no, shoot! I'm sorry, Tom. Just missed it too.
Come on, we can still enjoy the poolside bar for a few more hours while the sun's still up. I turned back towards the mainland. Then I heard a voice behind me. It came from one of the island locals who was sitting at the end of the pier. Apparently, there was going to be a smaller shuttle boat that would take people out to the casino in about an hour. Perfect for us. I made sure next time we were waiting out there 15 minutes early. Right at 3 p.m., the same guy from the dock earlier pulled up in a tiny speedboat. He helped us aboard. Then once we were seated, he fired up the engine. I asked him if we were going to have to wait for any other guests. He told us we were the only ones. So just like that, we took off. The sea breeze whipped through our hair as the island behind us got smaller and smaller in the distance. Molly grabbed onto me for safety as we looked into the sparkling horizon. Eventually, a speck appeared on that horizon, and not long after that, the speck became a boat. The boat upon which we'd be spending the rest of our evening. When we walked in, the place was popping. Blackjack tables, poker, roulette, a disco ball bumping to the beat of the bass, and bottle girls for every table, couch, and lounge chair. It looked like there were more in the rooms beyond as well. We probably spent the first 4 hours in this initial room. I wasn't really keeping track of time, but that was more of an estimate based on the amount of drinks me and my wife had downed. We jumped around from game to game, spending some time together and some apart. I wanted to give one more spin at the roulette table, and I wasn't sure where exactly she had ran off to. I was getting kind of low on chips, and I wondered if she was doing any better. I noticed the guy next to me had a huge stack of chips, the most I had seen anyone with the entire night. I inquired about where he had all the good luck, and he told me he made almost all of his earnings in the private rooms. He went on to explain that the casino operates offshore because what goes on in the private rooms is very illegal, but not in international waters. I asked if he had any tips. He told me to stay calm, be logical, and don't do anything rash. He said you can make a lot of money there, but you have to know when it's a good time to sit back and observe, and when it's a good time to punch it and buy in high. And the last thing he told me was that that room was not for the lighthearted or the morally righteous. I went to go find Molly. The first area beyond the curtain door was a little waiting area with a bouncer. He asked us if we wanted to play in a private room, and made sure that we knew we had to stay for the duration of the game. So if we had to use the restroom, to do it now. He reiterated what the one guy told me about this being a moral ground zero. Then we waited. I hadn't noticed anyone come out of the room, but after we waited for about 20 minutes, the door opened, and we found 2 chairs in front of a bank teller window type of thing, with a little slot, presumably to exchange our chips. Beyond the window was a bigger room with several vertical wall panels made up of gray metal sheets. There was a door in the corner of the room, and a large mirror on each wall. A bright disc-shaped light on the ceiling was the only means of illumination. Someone stepped into the room with us. It was one of their bottle girls. She poured each of us a glass and explained that tonight's game would come in 3 parts. Minimum bet would be 15 credits, and we would be required to place a bet for each game. The first game would require us to bet on who would hang in the longest. Suddenly, I felt a bit of a nasty feeling as I thought about all the warnings of moral values. When it was described to me, I imagined something along the lines of the board game Sorry, where you had to bump off the other players to win. I hadn't even anticipated the possibility of a survival game. So you can imagine my relief when they wheeled 5 horizontal bars into the room beyond our window. I guess my wife had gotten the same idea.
When they said, who can hang in the longest, what came to your mind?
I guess I thought we were sponsoring the Hunger Games for a second there. That's when they marched 5 women, completely naked, out onto the floor. My wife glared at me. I told her I honestly had no idea, but she crossed her arms. Each of the women took their place under the bars. My immediate thought was that when I first saw them, they looked tired and disheveled. They certainly didn't seem happy to be there, but given what I thought the circumstances were a minute ago, it didn't bother me as much as it should have.
So we just have to pick to which one can hang on the bar the longest? Seems easy. The lightest one should have the advantage. Second from the right.
Yeah, but what about grip strength?
How would we know what their grip strength is like?
I don't know. Maybe the one on the left? Maybe the one next to her?
This feels so wrong. It's like we're slave traders up here or something.
I could tell that she was half joking, but a small part of me did feel it was wrong. Sitting up here judging these exposed women based on their bodies. Our drinks were refilled and we were given a little card. Without going into too much detail, the card contained odds and buy-in price for each candidate. Our skinny candidate had the best odds, but that also meant she had the biggest buy-in price. So the system they had here was kind of an inverse from what you would expect from a horse track or something similar. We still decided to go for the small chick anyways. I could feel the drink starting to get to me as I counted out how many chips I'd need to put in a bet on her. Once the bets were in, one more of the casino employees went down into the room and dumped a bucket of water onto the floor. The water spread evenly throughout the room, creating a shallow pool all the way around.
What is that for?
I don't know. Maybe it's to make it obvious if someone touches the ground? To be honest, I really had no idea, but soon I would find out. The competition began, and all 5 ladies jumped onto the bar. One of them immediately lost her handle and came crashing to the ground. Her scream was cut short by an electric buzz. She was flailing and freaking out on the ground.
Oh my god.
That's when I realized the true intent of the groundwater. It wasn't to show who had touched the ground. I mean, maybe it was, but the main purpose was a motivation to stay on the bar. There was some kind of an electric current running through the water. Probably not enough to kill, but definitely enough to pack a punch. The poor lady was screeching and desperately trying to get back to the bar, but she didn't have what it takes to hold on. She kept falling and getting shocked, then trying to pull herself back up before falling again. It was hard to watch. After about 20 seconds, the girl next to her went down, and it looked like the surge that went through her was even more violent. She, however, was able to get back up onto the bar and wrap her legs around it in order to avoid further pain. The first woman just wasn't able to pull herself up though. Molly was having difficulty stomaching what she was seeing. She grabbed my hand and gave me a helpless look of concern.
Let's get out of here.
We headed for the exit, but the door was locked. Hey, we're done! Let us out! But we were reminded that we had agreed to stay for the entire game. And I realized that not only would we have to sit there, but we'd also have to place bets and continue to support the degrading, inhumane experiences that were going on down there. What had I gotten us into? Another girl fell and got a short jolt of electricity before hopping and wrapping her legs around the bar for safety. It came down to 2 final girls. Our girl and the more muscular looking girl I had suggested earlier. Our girl started to lose her grip and shifted around to regain her position. But a couple of seconds later she was wobbling again. She cried out and actually burst into tears while still holding onto the bar. I guess she already knew she was going to lose, but continued to hold on for as long as possible. Before long, she slipped, and I could actually hear her yell out as she did so. Luckily, she only had a few seconds of voltage. The current seemed to shut off, and the last woman let herself down from the bar in safety. The whole thing was maybe a minute and a half, but the first to have fallen was in pain for all of that. She was alive, but she didn't get up right away. Her hair was literally standing up in all directions and her skin was charred like something out of a cartoon. It was just disgusting to watch. barbaric. But that's probably not a strong enough word to describe the pain she must have been in. Eventually, the room was cleared and a water vacuum was used to dry things up, as the bars were taken out in preparation of the next game. They ended up bringing out these big white yellow rulers, about 4 feet in length, and placing them against the wall. When they brought the women back out, they had on nothing but these knee-high boots, which subsequently latched into the wall, at the knee and at the toe. So their shins were pretty much locked in, parallel to the wall. Our drinks were refilled. We were given another card simply labeled Flexibility. Like before, it gave us odds and a buy-in price for each contestant. I noticed that some of them were the same, but a few had been swapped out. The final 2 girls from the last game were still in there. We again contemplated not betting. We stalled for a few minutes, hoping they would just start the game without our bet. The bottle girl came back and told us there had been a change, and exchanged the card we had for another card. The only difference was they added 1 more contestant. Again, we tried to wait it out without betting, but we were interrupted by a bouncer who burst into the room and told us that we had to hurry up and make a bet. We tried to explain that we were no longer comfortable with it, but it did not help. I realized our best option was just to finish the game and not come back. We soon realized there were only 2 contestants out of the 6 that we can even afford with the chips we had left, and they were the bottom 2 in terms of odds. We went with the cheapest one, wanting to support this heinous game as little as possible. The game started and the object was to bend as far back as possible in a bridge position. The score was measured by how close they could get their hands to their heels. It didn't seem like this game would be nearly as brutal as the last one, but I was unfortunately surprised how close it came. I saw contortions I didn't even think were possible. All of the contestants were able to see each other, and each of them seemed to be trying their hardest. If there was some kind of external motivator in this game, like there was in the last one, I couldn't see what it was, but I could tell none of them wanted to lose. It got to the point that one of the girls was pushing herself so hard that she screamed out and collapsed onto the floor when she wasn't able to go any further. As they continued to strain, there were 2 clear leaders, the petite girl and the more buff-looking one who were the final 2 in the previous round. This time the smaller girl came out on top, and her rival slammed her hand on the floor in frustration. Round 2 was over, only 1 to go. The ladies were pushed to the breaking point, but I was just glad we got through that one, with no one's back being broken. It wasn't even the worst thing in the world. I was hoping that the final round would be more tame, and we could get out of there with somewhat of a lighter conscience. Hopefully, we'd be able to suppress this night and enjoy the rest of our vacation after this. That all went out the window with what happened next though. 5 men came into the room, each carrying a long-nosed rifle gun. But before you ask, no one was shot during the game. But I didn't know that at the time. That's not to say what actually ended up going down wasn't horrifying though. The barrel of each of these guns was painted with a series of rainbow-colored stripes stretching from the tip of the gun inwards. I didn't understand what the meaning of this was until the bottle girl came out and gave us the final card. Printed upon it was the name of the last game, Penetration. I looked at it in disbelief, but before I could even begin to protest, Molly pointed out that with the chips we had left, we couldn't even afford the cheapest buy-in. Maybe this would finally prompt them in kicking us out. We were more than ready to be done with this place, but after we once again failed to place a bet, the bouncer came in to see what was up. We explained our situation and he told us we'd have to get more chips and told my wife to come with him. Minutes later, he came back with a velvet bag and handed it to me. It was filled with tons of chips, way more than what we ever had, more than the guy at the roulette table, more than we could ever probably afford. "Where's my wife?" I asked, but he was already gone. That's when the bottle girl came through one more time, with another card in hand and told me that there's been a change. I turned around and looked into the window into the game room, and what I saw was more upsetting and disturbing than anything I had laid eyes upon that evening. Stripped down and shaking with fear, Molly had joined the lineup of contestants.
Number 14. Isolated Getaway.
This isn't easy for me to talk about. If you've ever tried to make long-term plans in a relationship, you'll probably know what it's like. My boyfriend and I had gone out for 2 years and decided to plan a relaxing little getaway. You never think that this kind of thing would happen when you're planning our trip, but we ended up splitting up a month and a half before. Ideally, I would have waited until after the vacation to break up with him, but when I caught him fooling around with his physical therapist, I didn't even wait a day before ending it. Luckily for me, I still had a suite booked at the Grand Maritime Beach Resort. For whatever reason, even though he did all the research and booking, the reservation was made under both of our names with my email address. I figured it would be a good consolation prize for the suffering he put me through. Besides, I wasn't going to let him ruin my much-needed time off. He'd already done enough damage. I'd be enjoying this vacation with or without him. It felt amazing to hop off the plane and stuff my winter jacket into my bag for the rest of the week. I breezed through the airport, at the end of which a short, chubby guy asked me if I needed a ride. I told him that I was looking for the Grand Maritime Shuttle, and it turned out that he was the driver. I guess I lucked out because we didn't even have to wait for other passengers. I'd be enjoying that sunshine before I knew it. Once we arrived at the resort, they told me my room wasn't quite ready, but they offered to take my bags and let me enjoy the pool and beach while they made the preparations. To be honest, that's exactly what I wanted. I would worry about unpacking later. I got changed in the bathroom and found myself a poolside chair. The resort was not at all what I remembered my ex describing to me. First, I expected more people. I mean, I was the only one at the pool area. It looked like there were some more people by the beach, but it felt like it should have been much more busy at this time of year. Still, I didn't mind some isolation and time to myself. It was also kind of a shoddy place. I remember it looking much better in the photos. Leave it to my stupid ex to not do the research. Who cares though? I was here, catching some sun and not at work. A couple of loose pool tiles wouldn't change that. I decided to take a look around the resort a bit. Again, I was pretty unimpressed. Actually, it was kind of creepy. It felt as though it hadn't been renovated since the 70s, and there was nobody around. It was like exploring the ruins of a forgotten old resort. There was a smaller pool that I came across that was empty and filled with moss. The paintings on the wall were cute, or at least they might have been several years ago, but the paint had chipped away, so that the eyes of the tribal figures were depicted just as empty voids. I felt more like I was in a forbidden temple than a welcoming beach resort. Corroded statues and broken fences were just a couple more clues as to why the place was so empty. There was even a boat on the beach that was turned over in the sand, gutted for parts and covered in graffiti. Perhaps the strangest part about it were the tiny little speakers hidden in rocks around the resort, which were probably the only evidence that the place was actually operational. I decided to just go back to the pool and tan until my room was ready. While I waited, one of the staff came up to me and asked if I was interested in a complimentary massage. That sounded good to me. I followed him into a spa building next to the pool. I laid out face down on the massage table and he began to go to work on my shoulders. It was oddly quiet. No music or anything, just the sound of him breathing and kneading my flesh. It was a bit uncomfortable, but at the same time it felt so good, so I tried to ignore it. Then it got more uncomfortable. The guy just presumably unhooks my bikini and goes to work on the part of my back and sides. I don't usually get a lot of massages, but shouldn't he ask before doing something like that? Then I remembered why I was here, and I thought I should let myself live a little. Someone else came into the room and started talking to the masseuse in a language I couldn't understand. It sounded like he was answering a bunch of questions, and he sounded kind of angry. His voice got louder as he came into the room. It sounded like he was right next to my head, so I opened my eyes and the guy was right there staring at me. I panicked, but I didn't quite know what to do. He started pacing around the room, talking to the guy. I felt like his eyes were locked onto me. My relaxation level dropped fast and my nervousness level was skyrocketing. This guy was unbelievable. But then he actually grabbed my butt. I screamed out, "Hey!" but I couldn't fully turn away without exposing myself. I was just about ready to be done with this massage. Why wasn't the masseuse telling this creep to buzz off? The guy didn't let me go when I yelled at him. What the hell? They just carried on their conversation, only raising their voices. So I started kicking and thrashing my feet and screaming at them to stop. Only problem was, I could raise all the ruckus I wanted, but we all knew that there was probably nobody out there to hear me. I tried to fight my way out, but the masseuse ended my struggle swiftly when he dug his thumbs somewhere into my shoulders as hard as he could. He must have hit some pressure point or something, because that was the last thing I remembered. I was out. I woke up. By the time I remembered what had happened, I realized that I was in a far worse situation. I was on a speedboat zipping through the ocean, accompanied by only that strange man who had violated me. I could see the island off in the distance, and it was only getting further and further away. I jumped out of the boat and swam as fast as I possibly could. I heard the engine die, and the driver turned around as soon as he realized I was gone. Before I knew it, the boat was back in front of me. He told me it was stupid to try to swim back, and that it was further than it looked, and yanked me back into the boat. He was right. I didn't have the stamina to swim all the way back to shore. As I stared off at how far it really was, I saw a resort on the coast that looked far nicer than my own. Why couldn't my stupid ex have done his research and booked that decent place? That's when I realized something. The sign displayed above the resort just barely read in the distance. It said, Grand Maritime Beach Resort.
Number 15. Last Resort. I looked up and saw a ship departing from the dock. A couple of jet ski riders zoomed by the ship's wake, even managing to catch a little air. That looked fun. Maybe I could do a little bit of that later. I dug my toes into the warm sand and looked at my watch. It was 2:03. It seemed like as good a time as any to grab myself a drink. After all, the bar here at the Grand Maritime was complimentary, so why not? Lucy, you okay? I shook my sleeping girlfriend's shoulder lightly to see if she wanted anything.
Yeah. I just fell asleep. What time is it?
About 2. You were tired. You look dead.
Thanks.
I was just going up to the bar. Do you want anything to drink?
You could grab me a pina colada, I guess.
Okay. With that, I kissed her and headed off to the bar. When I got back with the drinks, my girlfriend seemed to have wandered off, so I resumed my position on the lounge chair and stared off at the shoreline for a bit, full of hope that this was going to be the best vacation ever. This was so nice. About 15 minutes went by. Lucy still didn't show up. 10 minutes more. Another 15 minutes. Where had she run off to? There was this old German couple at the chairs behind us. I asked if they'd seen a blonde girl in a black bikini sitting here, and where she might have headed off to. They said they had seen her talking to the survey guy. When I asked who the survey guy was, they told me he was going around from chair to chair with a clipboard, asking people if they'd like to fill out a 15-minute satisfaction survey, and that they'd seen him talking to Lucy. I asked what direction they'd gone, but neither one of them was sure. Immediately, I knew something was wrong. Lucy was not the type to spend 15 minutes filling out a survey, especially on vacation. The next closest person was an attractive young girl sipping on a smoothie by herself. I asked her if she might have seen my girlfriend, possibly with a guy holding a clipboard. She told me she wasn't sure about Lucy, but she may have seen the clipboard guy. According to her, he had been going from chair to chair and had asked her if she wanted to sign up for some kind of island adventure thing, but she had politely declined. Apparently, he was really pushing it, but she just wasn't interested. We were interrupted by a guy who was about my age, wearing long swim trunks.
Excuse me? My apologies for interrupting. I just happened to overhear that you say that you were looking for your girlfriend. My wife seems to have disappeared off this beach earlier this morning when I ran back to the room to get some sunscreen. I've been looking all over and haven't been able to find her.
Yeah, I just went to the bar and came back. She was gone. It's been almost an hour, so I started asking around.
Why don't we both investigate? Knowing my wife, there's probably some spa we don't know about that they've both run off to.
Yeah, you're probably right. Let's go find him. The girl I was talking to said the guy with the clipboard was headed down the beach to the left, so we continued that way.
My name's Mike, by the way.
Gary. We continued asking around. One guy said that he'd seen the survey guy come by, but he told him he wasn't interested. Another couple said they hadn't seen either of them. Then one chick said that some guy had asked her to come down to the activity shack to sign up for some kind of rainforest adventure, and she'd said no. That's when I remembered Lucy and I checking into the hotel. She found this pamphlet with all of these activities. I think she told me she was interested in doing some rainforest hike or something. Mike and I decided to look for this activity shack. We headed down the beach to the end of the resort's property. Well, Mike, I guess this is where we turn back.
I say we continue searching down the beach for this supposed activity shack. I've already searched every inch of the resort for my wife. I'm convinced they're off property somewhere.
I guess I'll walk down a bit further with you. I've got nothing to lose by checking. We continued down the beach until we found an empty shack. It didn't look like an activity shack per se, just more of a little hut. Before moving on, Mike noticed something in the sand. He pulled up and dusted off a clipboard. There was one page on it, an empty spreadsheet with the words Resort Survey crudely printed at the top. We looked at each other. Mike was wide-eyed. He flipped over the paper. The back was completely different, a colored advertisement with bright graphics of ziplining, a campfire, and a waterfall. Something here didn't add up. I only saw 2 pairs of footsteps in the sand heading back out of the activity shack. Instead of leading back to the resort, they led back inland toward a street. Something was not right here. Mike and I headed to the street, where some sand was kicked up onto the pavement. Someone had definitely jaywalked right here, so we headed across the street into a rainforest. We decided to spread out a little bit and cover as much ground as possible. We made sure to stay within an earshot of each other, so when we inevitably got lost, at least we weren't separated from each other. Lucy! Lucy! It seemed like we were totally alone in this forest. It seemed useless. I was about ready to turn and go back. They couldn't be out here, but that's when I heard Mike call out to me.
Gary, over here, come quick.
My heart jolted and I ran over to him.
I was looking around over here, and I saw something way off in the distance. There were 3 figures standing there, 2 men and a woman. I was about to call out to them, when the 2 men jumped the lady and knocked her out. When they noticed me staring, they carried her into a car and sped off. I think it could have been your girlfriend.
I felt a sharp pain of nervousness and excitement in my chest. Could it have been Lucy? I wanted to be close to finding her, but I couldn't stand the idea of her not being okay. We ran over there. There was no real evidence to speak of, but there were tire tracks that we could follow. Not only was it our best bet of finding our women, but it was probably our only bet for finding our way out of here. We ended up following these tracks for 3 full hours. It was getting dark by the time we came across a little campsite. There was a bonfire that had recently been put out. The wood was still charred and I could smell smoke. The tracks continued on from there though, and 30 minutes later we were finally led out of the forest where the tire marks continued on sand. It was a private little beach area hidden by rocks on both sides. We eventually reached the end of the tracks, where a jeep was parked in the sand near the water and some footsteps led right into the ocean itself. Shoot, we wouldn't be able to track them through the water. And there were so many different ways they could have gone. My heart ached as the hope inside of me began to die. I stared into the same crystal blue waters that I had just hours before, but now with an outlook of despair. I felt like I was never going to see her again. I looked over to Mike.
I have an idea.
I'd never ridden a jet ski before, but I was gonna have to learn quick. It was easy enough to get the hang of, and I soon found myself focusing more on looking for the boat than worrying about the controls. We were back in front of the Grand Maritime Resort now. There was a little speedboat whipping across the current in the distance. A woman sat up and jumped off of the boat. She was thrashing in the water, swimming back towards the coast. The driver of the boat turned back and pulled her back in.
Did you see that?
Yeah, that was weird. Let's keep an eye on them. So we did our best to follow this boat, making sure not to get too close or to follow him too directly at any point. We zigzagged our way around, just staying barely within an eye shot. Eventually, the boat pulled in next to a much larger ship, which was anchored out at sea. The guy tied a rope tethering him to the larger ship, then climbed aboard, dragging the woman with him.
You park yours up next to the speedboat. I'll hold mine along the other side of the ship and swim back around to the side. That way, if they see yours, we'll have a backup to escape on.
This was it. If we didn't find Lucy here, I was probably never going to see her again. I parked the jet ski and climbed onto the boat. We headed down a dark metal hallway, trying to keep our footsteps as quiet as possible. As we traveled down, the sound of music thumping from another room got louder. Some kind of party was going on the other side of this wall. There was a door on the side, or we could just continue further down the hall into the dark. I decided to peek inside of the door and opened it just a crack. It was a huge room, dark with vibrant neon lights. Tons of people dressed up sat at slot machines and blackjack tables. I quickly and quietly closed the door, hoping I hadn't been noticed. I nodded my head at Mike to continue further down the corridor, which we couldn't see the end of because of the dark. Mike put his hand out in front of me to stop. He motioned to his ear, and I listened. I could hear breathing at the end of the hallway. There was no doubt that someone was standing guard. We knew he was there, and he knew we were here. Then, as if to break the silence and tension, his voice called out in the dark and told us we weren't allowed back here and to head back into the casino. Mike whispered for me to keep quiet, then spoke out to the guy.
Excuse me, sir. I was just looking for my wife. I believe she may have wandered back this way.
The guard told him that nobody had been through this way, but Mike insisted he double check. We heard the door he was guarding creak open, and Mike dragged me forward into the dark to where we could see the end of the hall. He yanked on the door, but it had automatically locked, so he hid in the corner behind the door.
Stand over there and wait for him to come through.
I could see where Mike was going with this. I wasn't convinced it would work, but I couldn't come up with much better. The guard came back through the door and saw me standing in the hall. I said nothing. He told me that nobody had gotten back there.
Thanks anyway.
The voice came from behind him as Mike jumped on the guy's back, taking him by surprise before he had a chance to close the door behind him. I bolted through the door and made it. It slammed shut with a huge metallic clang. I would be on my own from here on out. The room I found myself in was some kind of lab. There were several rows of operation tables and these vertical tubes with a blue glow emanating from them. I inspected the first one. It seemed to just be an empty water tank, though it did contain what looked like kind of a scuba regulator at the end of a tube. Before I could inspect any further, I heard a door being unlocked and I quickly dove behind the tank to hide.
We had no idea what we were getting ourselves into. Please, I just want to get my husband and go back to my hotel. Hey, what do you think you're doing? Get your hands off me.
Two men who looked to be employees of the casino slammed this woman to the operating table with her screaming all the while. I couldn't see fully what they were doing to her from where I was, but I did see the man's pants drop at his ankles, and based on the screams, I'm sure you can guess the rest. It was hard enough to stand by and let this happen, but I also kept imagining my Lucy in the same situation. My fists were shaking with rage. I was gritting my teeth and I could barely contain myself. Still, I had the advantage of them not knowing I was here, and if I was gonna have any chance, I had to keep it that way. The girl on the table seemed to just give up the fight, and the man doing the thrusting said 10-1, then spewed out a bunch of different numbers, as if he was some kind of twisted odds maker. Then the girl, now stark naked, was pushed out into another room. Then the guy followed her out there with a rifle gun. Whoa, I was in way over my head. I had no way to defend myself against that. I had to find Lucy and get out of there without getting caught. The first guy went into a different door, and it looked like he headed up some stairs. I jumped up to investigate the rest of the lab. There were more of these water tanks stretching down the length of the room. What I found was that many of them contained women, again, completely exposed, breathing through tubes. I recognized one of them as the lady we'd seen jump off the speedboat earlier. The next girl looked in much worse shape. Her skin looked charred and her hair was standing up in every direction. My hope was dwindling, but what happened next, I can't even explain the feeling that shot through me. It was Lucy. I nearly blacked out upon seeing her. I was feeling every emotion a person can feel all at once. Her eyes were closed and she was just gracefully floating there, breathing through a mask, but definitely breathing. I knocked on the glass, unsure of how to get her out. She didn't hear. I knocked harder and her eyes shot open. You could just see that they were immediately filled with fear, that she'd been conditioned to expect abuse. But once she recognized me, everything changed. She put her hand up to the glass and I reached up and did the same. Once again, I heard the door unlock and I ducked into hiding. This time, it was two men. One looked like a native to the island, the other was a foreigner. Both were wearing suits. The foreign guy had a drink in his hand. He was overweight and seemed to have a breathing problem. There was a metal tube coming out of his neck that seemed to be regulating his respiratory system.
That was really quite a show you put on there, I must say. I do understand the relevance of games 2 and 3 when making such decisions, but what was the point of the first game?
The Islander guy responded, simply to break them.
I see. Well, this one performed beautifully. A fine specimen indeed. No doubt I'll be willing to shell out for her.
They started talking prices and times. That was it. I couldn't stand by anymore and watch this freaking guy whore out my girlfriend. I didn't care if I got myself killed. I couldn't sit there and hide anymore. I crawled out. The guy didn't see me. I got a running start and knocked the in the face full speed. I shattered my fist, but I didn't even realize it at the time. Before he knew what hit him, I grabbed the fat by the back of the neck and thrashed his face into the glass. It didn't budge, but it must have set off some kind of alarm and a red light started flashing. I thrust his face into the glass 2, 3, 4 times before it started to show a crack, which I noticed on the growing splotch of liquid red now on the surface of the window. I reared back one more time with all my might and shattered the tank on this guy's skull. Water washed out everywhere with a greater force than I had expected. Lucy went sliding across the lab floor. I helped her get to her feet, but there was no time for a heartfelt reunion. We ran for our lives. As we exited, I heard the voices of yelling men behind us. We made it to the hall where I had left Mike and the guard. I wasn't sure where the guard had gone, but it was clear what had happened to Mike. He was beaten to a pulp and left sprawled on the floor. There was no time to mourn. If we were lucky, we might just get out alive. We made it to the hatch. Somehow I was able to pry it open. We were back into the open air, almost home free, but what waited on the other side would be possibly my toughest challenge yet. The guard who had beaten up Mike was standing over the jet ski I had pulled up in, which was on fire, and he continued to pour on the gasoline. He turned around and saw us. Not knowing what else to do, I pushed him, hoping to catch him off balance or something, and somehow it worked. He went crashing down into the flaming vehicle before falling into the water. I had no idea if he'd gotten to the other jet ski, but it was our only hope.
This way!
I took my girlfriend's hand and jumped out into the ocean. We swam like there was no tomorrow.
Where are we going?
The ship billowed its horn over and over. I began to fear it might be a distress call. Still, if we got to the jet ski, there probably wasn't much they could do to catch us. This was it. It all came down to the escape. We turned the corner around the outside of the ship to where Mike's jet ski should have been. But it was gone. So that's it then. It was all for nothing.
There! What's that over there?
Off in the distance was Mike's jet ski. It had just drifted away from the ship. It was a long swim, but we made it.
The rest of the night was mostly a blur. I don't remember much of when we crashed into the shore, terrifying the tourists who were enjoying the ocean in moonlight. I don't remember the trip to the emergency room, but I do remember when the pain of what they had done to me finally set in. The police came to talk to us, as did some representatives from the resort. The casino was in international waters, so it was out of the jurisdiction of the law. But they told us they were doing everything they could do to stop abductions on the land and keep tourists informed on the dangers of gambling offshore. They had warnings posted all over the island, but that didn't stop people from being drawn to the thrill, and they would find other ways to lure people in. The resort wasn't involved in any of this, but of course they told us they would be striving to improve their security on the beach and make sure people knew what dangers lie beyond their walls. They were kind enough to pay our medical bill, and we wouldn't have to worry about paying for our stay either. They even offered a free week at the resort at a time of our choosing. But I already knew we would never be coming back.
The pain of my broken hand was really starting to set in. The police wanted to know more about Mike and his wife, but we didn't have much information to help them, other than the fact that his wife was still out there. I asked if trafficking had always been a problem on this island. His response made everything that had happened that night seem even scarier. He scoffed at me and said, "If only it was just trafficking." Bonus video, unboxing my silver play button.
Welcome to a little break in the Creepypasta action. I've got a little bonus video for you guys as promised. So for this, I'm gonna be unboxing my silver play button that I got for getting 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. At least that's what I hope this is, because it does have the YouTube sticker, and it did come to me in the mail. Hopefully it's not just like a water bottle or something. So I'm actually kind of interested to see what this is going to be, because they recently changed the design of their play buttons. Oh, very nice packaging from YouTube. I'm going to toss this box out of the way. I also removed any stickers from that might dox me. But yeah, they changed the look of the play buttons, so I don't actually know if I'm gonna have the new one or the old one because they changed it pretty soon after I ordered my button. Very nice packaging, YouTube. It would be kind of cool if I had the old one because then I would be one of the few creators who gets their silver play button as the old one and their gold play button as the new one. From YouTube, you've just done something that very few YouTube creators accomplish. You had an astonishing 100,000 people subscribe to your channel. We know that numbers on YouTube can get really big, but we hope you don't lose sight of the reality behind that 6-digit milestone. Each and every person who has subscribed to your channel has been touched by what you've created. They were inspired, challenged, or entertained. Well, I hope if you're watching this, then you have been moved by what I created. You achieved this milestone with hard work, perseverance, and probably a healthy sense of humor too. You can be the judge of that. What you've accomplished can't be taken away from you, and we'd like to recognize you and all your hard work with this Silver Creator Award, a small token of our esteem and respect. We know that you don't do this for rewards. You do it because you have a drive to create and share, because you found an audience who cares. Believe us when we say that we can't wait to see what you do next. 1 million subscribers may be a long way off now, but you're closer than you think, and we're rooting for you. Sincerely, Susan Wojcicki signed this paper. All right, enough of this. What you really want to see is the Silver Creator Award, and it does look like it's the old one, so very cool. Take the packaging off of this thing. Congratulations, CZsWorld, on passing 100,000 subscribers. I'll have to figure out where I'm gonna put this. But anyway, just a quick little break from the creepypasta narration, and let's dig right back in with the next story.
Number 16, Forbidden House.
This is a story that happened several years back when trick-or-treating with my friend Alex, my older brother John, and his friend Evan. Every neighborhood has that one house that nobody ever wants to trick-or-treat at. Whether it be because of bad candy, mean owners, a dentist house, fear, or otherwise. In this case, our parents had told us that we could go off on our own this year, as long as we stayed together and agreed not to go to that house. I was in 4th grade that year, and the idea of getting to go off on our own was exciting to me at the time, so naturally, I agreed. When Alex and Evan got to our house, we waited around and answered the door for a while, trying to scare some of the younger trick-or-treaters. Eventually, after our parents took our baby sister to some of the houses, we grabbed our pillowcases and set off to get some candy. We lived in a pretty safe neighborhood, so it was common for kids our age, or even younger, to go out alone. Looking back now, I had grown up in a borderline pretentious suburban neighborhood, the type of community you'd see in movies like Donnie Darko or American Beauty. Almost everyone in our neighborhood had decorations, and those who didn't had these decorative wooden ghosts nailed to the side of their mailbox. They were more of a cutesy decoration than scary, but they did give a nice uniformity to all the houses in the neighborhood. It was starting to get dark when we reached the house that our parents told us not to go to. This wasn't your stereotypical dark manor at the end of the block, but it was a little further away from the street than many of the other houses, and sort of tucked back behind some trees. I suggested that we go back to our house to dump whatever candy we had off before hitting up another neighborhood, but John and the others were curious to see what the big deal was about the dark house. I'll have to admit, I was quite curious about why my parents didn't want us going over there, and it did seem harmless enough, so I figured they would have no way of knowing if we quickly hit this house. The driveway was long and dark, and there was no light coming from the house whatsoever. This was one of those houses where the front door was more on the side of the house, with a curved path leading back up to the front. I noticed that this house did not have the wood ghost attached to the mailbox like every other house in the neighborhood. As we walked up, I was starting to get a little nervous, and I told John that I didn't think anyone was home, but he thought I was just trying to chicken out and continued on anyways. We reached the house, and John loudly banged on the door. It was taking forever, and I was fairly convinced that the guy wasn't home or didn't want to deal with trick-or-treaters. Just when I was ready to turn and give up on the house, we all fell silent as the sound of footsteps could be heard on the other side of the door. While this did make me nervous,
I was also excited to see what was on the other side of the door that made my parents so worried about this house. So I stepped back a little bit, giving myself some room to run, if need be. The door opened, revealing an older man with a cane. This immediately alleviated some of my anxiety, as it would be pretty easy to run if need be. The man was actually very nice and told us that we were the first visitors of the night and that he didn't expect to see many trick-or-treaters this year. Apparently, he lived alone and had had some kind of dispute with the neighborhood homeowners association over the upkeep of his property, so many of the adults were trying to get back at him by excluding him from all the neighborhood festivities. He seemed like such a nice guy, and we actually felt pretty bad for him. We all wished him a happy Halloween before going on our way. I had felt silly about being nervous about visiting this house. At least, that's how I felt before what happened next. As we walked down the path back to the street side of the house, I happened to glance at the upstairs window and saw a man in a black hood peeking out from behind the window frame. As soon as I made eye contact with him, he moved back out of sight. My stomach immediately dropped, as the man had just said that he lived alone. I bolted as I told the guys to run, but John and Evan seemed convinced that I was just being a baby. I tried to quickly tell them that there was a man in the window, but I don't think they believed me. However, John, being the older of the two of us, was supposed to keep an eye on me, so when I made a mad dash back towards our house, he effectively gave chase. I knew in the back of my mind that, although the old man may not have been mobile, that this other guy was most likely a fully capable adult who probably would be able to catch us, so I didn't stop until I was inside the door. My parents had just returned from taking my sister out for a round of the neighborhood, and they could immediately see that there was something wrong. Not wanting to get in trouble for disobeying them, I lied and told them that we were walking by the house when I saw a man in black climbing through the window of the old man's house, and that he had seen us catching him in the act. Apparently, this was a pretty good cover story, as it was enough to get my mom to call the cops, and the four of us locked inside the house for the rest of the night. The other guys were pretty bummed out to have our trick-or-treating cut short, and we decided we'd watch a movie and begin trade negotiations on our candy a little early this year. I had a hard time paying attention to the movie and kept looking back to the window, thinking about what the possibility might be that the guy tracked us here. Not much later that night, we learned that the police had searched the old man's house and found a 19-year-old man hiding in the closet with a knife. Apparently, the intruder had no idea who lived there and decided to break in after seeing the house was completely dark and being avoided by trick-or-treaters on Halloween night. The old man was also unharmed. But years later, I still shudder to think about what could have gone down that night. What if I had seen the intruder on the way up to the house before learning that the old man lived alone? What if the intruder had been on the first floor and decided to give chase to us? But what chills me the most is what would have happened to that nice old man if we had never trick-or-treated at his house. Number 17. Secret Santa. For the last couple of years, my wife and I have hosted a Secret Santa gift exchange during the holidays. It's a fairly new tradition, but we thought it would be nice to put together since a lot of our friends can't really afford to buy gifts for everyone. We do it a little bit differently than some people might be accustomed to. Everyone randomly gets a name and has to buy that person a gift around $50. We have one get-together where everyone opens their gifts, but even after the swap, you never find out who gave you the gift. My wife and I agreed that that part is important. She says that what makes the holiday special is having good faith in all of our friends to get the person something good. In other words, if you're only buying a gift in order to get recognition for it, then the whole idea is kind of cheapened. Besides, these are our friends. If you can't trust them, who can you trust? Sure, there are exceptions where it's obvious who gave the gift, like last year when our friends Emily and Elena, who are married, ended up getting each other. Or also last year when Cynthia received a cheap ice tray as her gift from her recently ex-boyfriend, Mark. We were optimistic that this year would be filled with positivity, which it was, to a point anyway. We have a Secret Santa app that automatically emails everyone involved and tells them who they got. It's great because it allows us, as the organizers, not to get our Secret Santas spoiled. I got Troy, the newest addition to our party this year. I think I got the perfect gift for him too. Every time I go over to his apartment, there's stuff everywhere. Plates, silverware, Blu-rays. It's not like he's just too lazy to clean up after himself, it just seems like he doesn't have anywhere to put it all. So I got him one of those knife blocks, a dish rack, and a silverware organizer. That'll just cover the kitchen, but it's a start. I had a feeling Troy was going to appreciate it. The day of the gift exchange arrived. We had people drop off gifts in a pile as they came in. We all enjoyed some drinks and snacks as we caught up with each other for a couple of hours before getting down to it. By the time we started to open our gifts, everyone was getting a bit giggly. My wife pointed out that Troy seemed to have taken an interest in her friend Cynthia, which we could both get behind because they were the only two who were still single. It seemed like the party was alive and well. Most of the gifts were really good too, and people kept up their poker faces as far as I could tell when the present they brought was being opened. Of course, there were a couple of obvious ones, like our friend James, who most likely got his own wife, seeing as how she didn't know how anyone else would have known what she wanted this year. Marco actually ended up getting 2 presents somehow. I couldn't figure out why. I was worried that the app had messed up and someone was going to end up with no presents, but I did a quick count and realized there were 11 total presents for the 10 of us. I guess someone just wanted to make Marco's day and get him something in addition to buying something for their person. He ended up loving both presents, so it seemed like no harm for the most part, though I just worried it was a bit unfair to everyone else. The final present remaining came down to my wife. It was a black box wrapped in what looked to be a plastic trash bag and tied up in actual rope. It was, I'm not gonna lie, a really ugly exterior, and she had a lot of trouble opening it by herself. In fact, nobody could seem to pry the knot off of it. Granted, we were all kind of drunk at that point, so we ended up having to cut the thing open. She opened the box and pulled out a small piece of paper. She looked upset as she read it. Then her hands started to shake and her eyes glazed over. "What is it?" She showed me the slip of paper. There were just a couple of words on it. "Santa says you all die." I quickly looked inside the box, only to find there was nothing else inside. I can get kind of defensive at times, and I got pretty upset and took it out on everyone. Within a couple minutes, the party was over and everyone was out in the cold. I wanted to get to the bottom of who the hell thought this would be funny by asking everyone who their secret Santa was and doing a little research of my own to find out who was lying. But she insisted that it wasn't that big of a deal and she'd rather not ruin it for everyone. Still, I felt really betrayed. These were supposed to be our friends, and I couldn't understand who would want to hurt her like that. But we were tired and just decided to retire to bed for the evening. I told myself I would get her something great to make up for it and started brainstorming some gift ideas, but all I could think about was who would do this? I stayed awake for a while longer trying to think of any reason that someone would have to try to spook us. That's when I heard someone rummaging around the house. A chill went up my spine, and after being frozen in fear for a few moments, I sat up and began to formulate a plan. My wife woke up and asked me what I was doing. "There's someone in the house. Stay here and keep the door locked until I give you the okay." With that, I slipped out and locked the door behind me. My blood was boiling at this point. I didn't know if this had anything to do with the present from earlier, but all I wanted to do was find who was behind this and bash his head in. The only issue was I couldn't hear anyone moving around anymore. It seemed that the house was quiet. I methodically checked the entire upstairs. It was empty. As I was checking the last closet, I heard a huge crash from downstairs. I sprinted, fists blazing, but the scene I found in the living room was far more horrifying than I could have imagined. The tree had been knocked over into the fireplace, which was now on, and it had begun to burn. I heard footsteps running to the door, but I knew I couldn't go after him now. In a panic, I turned off the gas fireplace and ran to the kitchen to grab a jug of water. I poured it over the tree, which was beginning to burn even more, but all I could manage to do was slow down the rapidly spreading fire. Luckily, my wife had already called 911, and the fire department showed up before long. I was able to slow down the fire enough until they arrived. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but it gets far worse from there. The police showed up and questioned us about what had gone down that evening. We told the entire story, and they were particularly interested in the app we'd used to sort the names for the Secret Santa. The chief told us that an undercover police officer would be on our block for the time being, and to call 911 if we had any other disturbances. He also gave me a card, a point of contact for if we had any other information. It was nearly 4 a.m. at that point, and we were ready to put this nightmarish evening behind us. when I got a call from Terry, James's wife. They were both at the Secret Santa that night, and I noticed a couple of missed calls from her as well. Desperate for more information, I picked up, but before I could explain the mess that we had been in, she explained that she was calling from the hospital. Apparently, they had been driving home from our house when some maniac ran them off the road. She was fine, but went on to explain that James had been injured pretty badly, though he was expected to make a recovery. I decided that enough was enough. It was time to do a little investigation of my own. The next morning I headed out to the spot of the crash, as Terry had described to me. If I was going to get to the bottom of this, I had to be thorough. After all, as far as I knew, Terry was trying to cover up her or James' guilt with that phone call. I found tire tracks going off the road, but that really only clears one of them. I made a call on over to the hospital. I knew they wouldn't share any information, since that's someone's private medical info, but I acted like a concerned family member and asked if they'd been found. I was able to find out they both got admitted at the same time, so they were both in the clear. My next step was finding out who they got gifts for in the Secret Santa, which involved me showing up and asking to see the email. I had to catch them by surprise to make sure they didn't try to doctor anything. So I knew I had Troy, and my wife had Emily. It was already fairly obvious that James had his wife, Terry, but I did find out that Terry had Elena. Don't worry about keeping track of all the names. Just know that my list of suspects was narrowing. I also discovered that the person who went after them was in a white van with black tape over the license plate. Next on my list were Emily and Elena. It took me a while to come up with an idea about how I might prove their whereabouts, but I ended up finding a way to check on them without either of them knowing. See, every year there's this big Christmas tree in town square. Everyone in the town is encouraged to put up an ornament of their own, and the whole thing is live streamed for the entire month of December. They would most certainly go past it on their way home. All I had to do was go back to last night, around the time they should have been driving home. Luckily enough, I was able to spot their car on the stream. While that didn't necessarily clear both of them from what happened at our house, it did make them innocent of running James and Terry off the road, unless they had just gotten a second car that I don't know about. But I figured I could reevaluate them if that came to be the case. I also had to make the assumption that the intruder at our house and the crazy driver that went after our friends were related incidents, and the time frame of events seemed to line up with that theory. Of course, the nasty present my wife received only backed up this idea further. I tried getting a hold of Emily and Elena to see who they got gifts for, but neither one of them could be reached. The next and final couple was Marco and Gina. They'd taken an Uber home from the party, so all I had to do was show up and ask to see their ride history. When I arrived, Marco was actually kind of upset that I was accusing them. I thought to myself, this was it. It must be one of them. But I hadn't really planned for what I would do if I'd gotten this far. I didn't bring anything to defend myself with. Not only was Marco a big guy, but it was 2 against 1. I clenched my fist behind my back and slowly stepped away as Marco yelled at me, going on about how he was appalled that I didn't trust him after everything we'd been through. I figured that my best bet was to turn and run for my car. Then I could hopefully make a getaway and alert the police. Tension within me built as I waited for him to make a move. Just when I was ready to turn and run, Gina came up with the phone to her ear and said that Terry was on the line and she had just found out about the car crash. She invited me in to show me the evidence I was looking for, and stupidly, I accepted. For all I knew, this could have been an act to lure me in and make me more vulnerable. Still, when Gina delivered the news, I thought I saw something change in Marco's expression, like an understanding had come over him, like he realized now why I had to see their whereabouts last night. Still, I was jumpy inside of their house, and in my mind, I was keeping track of where they both were at all times for my own safety, though I tried not to show it. Marco brought up their trip history on Uber, and to my surprise, they had gone home after the party, no doubt about it. They also showed me who their Secret Santa recipients were. Marco's was Cynthia, and Gina's was James. I told them I had to be on my way, and headed out, where a van was pulling up to the curb by their house. As soon as I looked up at it, it haphazardly sped away down the street. I ran after it and found that the license plate was covered with black tape. It was just like what Terry had described to me. I dialed 911 and let them know what had just happened. He was still going after people, so I knew I was racing the clock here. There were only 2 suspects left, Troy and Cynthia, the 2 singles who had been flirting at the party. I hoped to God it wasn't Troy after I'd put so much into my gift for him, but deep down, I knew it was. The nature of the crime at my house pointed to it being a male. Still, I touched base with my wife and told her to look into Cynthia while I confronted him. Everything was boiling down to this. Troy lived alone, so I wouldn't be able to get any info from anyone else. He did live in an apartment complex, however, so there had to be a camera somewhere that would prove he was out several hours after the party ended. I gave the police chief a call, and he agreed to send someone out to meet me at Troy's apartment complex with a warrant. I waited out by the office. This was our chance to nail him. What was taking them so long? As I waited around, I heard a familiar voice. It was Troy. I was so stupid, of course he'd come back after nearly getting caught back at Marco's. This was not good. He knew I knew, but he didn't let on to it right away. Well, two can play at that game. My only choice was to play dumb. He pretended to be surprised to see me. He always did have a good poker face. I told him that I had come to check on him when I heard about James and Terry. He told me he had just heard this morning and went over to the hospital to visit James. He was finally telling me something I could believe, a good move on his part. It would definitely make them less suspicious of him, but that wouldn't work on me. I'd caught him, red-handed, but he knew I knew too much. What was his plan? How long was he gonna play dumb? All I had to do was stall a little bit longer. I decided to press him on it. I asked him if anything weird had happened after he had left the night before. I was hoping to trip him up with an inconsistency in his story, something that didn't line up with the actual timeline of events. All I got out of him, though, was that he had gone straight home. He asked what I had done after everyone had left, and it was at that moment that something clicked in my head. He was going to try to paint me as the villain. He knew we would be home and asleep after the party, so we would have no alibi to prove that we hadn't gone and run down James's car before coming back to set our own Christmas tree ablaze in an attempt to make ourselves look like the victims. After all, we'd set up the party. We could have structured it so that my wife would receive the creepy note from me. He was going to try to pin it all on me, but I was one step ahead of him. The detective arrived. I told Troy he was busted, but I knew it would be a battle to prove my own innocence as well. He continued to play dumb. The detective provided the apartment complex with a warrant, and we all sat down to watch the footage. This next part, I deeply regret. I'll never be able to erase that look of betrayal out of my mind, because the footage proved that Troy was innocent. I wish I had more time to apologize for accusing him, but I had to go check on my wife. All signs now pointed to Cynthia being the culprit. I rushed home, where my wife informed me she had just gotten off the phone with Cynthia's roommate. Cynthia was also innocent. This didn't make any sense. We'd cleared everyone who was at the party. Had we overlooked someone? Was it somebody else? Outside of the group? We soon got our answer. If you're easily disturbed, I suggest you don't continue. We got another call from the police chief. Emily and Elena were dead. Somebody had broken down their door and slit both of their throats, leaving them to bleed out under the Christmas tree. The killer had also slathered a message on the carpet in blood. It read, "Lesbo cunts," with arrows pointed up at them. I was sickened just by hearing about this. But the police had a strong lead on who the killer might be. Mark Berkeley, Cynthia's ex from last year's Secret Santa, the a-hole who got her an ice tray for a gift. Apparently, one of the first things the detective on our case did was contact the developer of the Secret Santa app. He was given a master list of everyone involved. I guess we never removed Mark from the list when we added Troy this year, and the app told Troy to get a present for Mark. Troy must have thought it was supposed to be Marco, seeing as how he would have no idea who Mark even is. That would also explain why Marco ended up with 2 gifts. Then Mark must have snuck in at some point and dropped my wife's gift into the pile. It was all starting to come together. We also found out that Mark had completely lost his mind when Cynthia had broken up with him a little over a year ago. There were multiple police reports of him threatening her, stalking her, and loitering outside her apartment. Maybe when Mark accidentally got the email about our Secret Santa, that somehow set him off again and he decided to terrorize all of us. Everyone still in her life. Everyone who's as close to her as he wishes he could be. The chief told me that he had already sent his squad over to Cynthia's, as Mark would likely be heading over there next after having hit every other couple at the party. But I knew that wouldn't be the case. If Mark really had snuck into the party to deliver the fake gift, he'd have seen what went on between Cynthia and Troy, and he'd be in a furious rage. He was saving his best, most brutal, cold-blooded strike for last, and Cynthia was never on his hit list. I raced over to Troy's as quickly as I could, but feared I may be too late when I arrived to find his front door had been left wide open. I walked inside. It seemed strangely empty. My heart sank. Was I too late? Or was Troy even home when Mark had arrived? I called out, "Troy?" No response. "Mark?" I headed into the kitchen, where I saw that the dish rack and silverware organizer I'd gotten him had been put to good use. He'd finally tidied up his crazy mess of stuff. For that little moment, I was glad I was able to get him something worthwhile. But then it happened. I'd never heard it coming, but I did see a shadow come over me as I noticed the other gift I had gotten Troy, the knife block. But one of the knives was missing. Number 18. Blind Date.
I'd always found the concept of a blind date to be somewhat of a gamble. At best, it could lead to a very fun time, and who knows, maybe even something more. But you run the risk of a terrible and awkward hour or more, and you never really know what you might get. Tara and I exchanged names and phone numbers online, then decided only to text each other before the date in order to preserve the blind aspect of the encounter. I arrived at the restaurant a few minutes early to find that she was already there. We quickly got a table and sat down. After our initial introductions, one of the first things that she did was suggest that we both turn off our phones for the remainder of the date. While I was surprised at her progressive request, I quickly agreed and powered down my device. I had been on all too many bad dates where the girl had fallen back on looking at her phone at the first hint of an awkward moment. I mean, I've been guilty of it too, so I figured we may as well at least attempt to get to know each other, now that we had taken the time to arrange a date. We started with the small talk. The city, our jobs, the obligatory stuff. Then she started to ask some weird questions. Questions like, have you ever thought about murdering someone? I told her, we all have at some point, right? In a joking manner, of course. She went on about how planning the perfect murder in her head was kind of a fun hobby of hers. When she asked me how I would do it, I explained that I kind of like the Alfred Hitchcock idea of stabbing someone with an icicle. I wasn't really sure what to think when I heard what she said next. She told me, if you do it right, you've got no reason to make the evidence disappear. Of course, I was curious as to where she was going with this.
These detectives always look for a motive,
she explained.
So you simply have to have no reason to be there, no connection to the person, and of course, no witnesses.
While it would be easy to get away with something like that, I did have to wonder, why would you want to kill a random person? She just said that she finds it kind of exciting. It's not that I didn't realize this conversation was weird. Normally, I wouldn't find myself talking about such things with a girl, nonetheless on the first date, but for whatever reason, I didn't really mind discussing it with her. I even found it kind of fun. At the end of the date, I picked up the bill, and she asked if I had any plans for the rest of the night. Taking the hint, I invited her back to my place, and before long, we were off. Upon arriving home, I stepped into the bathroom to freshen up and brush my teeth, just in case. While I was in there, I turned my phone back on to see if I had missed any messages while I was out on the date. Tara was waiting for me out in the living room, so I tried to be quick. I noticed just one message on my phone. It was from Tara, 30 minutes ago. That's odd. We hadn't even left the restaurant 30 minutes ago. Both of our phones were off at the time. I opened the message.
Hey, I'm so sorry I didn't make it. Someone slashed my tires. I tried calling, but your phone was dead. Did you still want to meet up?
As I tried to comprehend what I just read, I heard her doing something out in the kitchen. The sound of a drawer opening or something. I was about to go out there and find out what she was doing rummaging through my stuff when a wave of realization hit me with a petrifying force. No reason to be there, no connection to the person, no witnesses. I locked the bathroom door, grabbed my phone, and called the number I had for Tara. It rang once, twice, 3 times. I started sweating bullets as I saw her shadow appear from the crack under the door. She had made an effort to make sure all of her movements were silent. Then she just stood outside the door. After what seemed like ages, I heard a voice on the other side of the line.
Hello? Hello?
The woman that picked up the phone was not the same woman standing outside my bathroom door. Not knowing what else to do, I hung up the phone and began to dial 911. She must have heard me dialing because she then grabbed the door handle and tried to come into the bathroom. As soon as she realized that it was locked, she quickly moved away from the door. I braced myself for her to barge down the door or something. That's when I heard my front door open and quickly close. I assumed that she had left, but I didn't dare leave the safety of the locked bathroom until the cops had arrived and locked down the area. Of course, they found no trace of the woman. I tried to get them to take down a description of her appearance, but I was told that there was no case. Since I had invited her in, she hadn't actually broken any law. As far as I could tell, nothing had been stolen. Besides, without knowing her name or who she actually was, it was unlikely that they would have found her anyway. Eventually, I got into contact with the real Tara and told her about what happened. She was understanding when I said that I no longer felt comfortable meeting up for a blind date. It's been a couple of days now since the incident, and I've had an uneasy feeling since then. I've barely gotten any sleep. Sometimes I think I hear the sound of my door handle wiggling like someone is trying to get in, but when I get up and check on it, the sound dissipates. She knew where I lived now. What was to stop her from coming back and finishing the job? I tried to tell myself that the whole thing was a cruel prank, that she was trying to mess with me for her own entertainment, and that she probably just wanted to scare me or something. Until today. See, since that day, I haven't really had much of an appetite. I finally had the stomach to eat something again and decided to go to the kitchen and prepare something for myself when I found the kitchen knife put away in the wrong drawer.
Number 19. CreepsMcPasta narrated my nightmare. I recently began listening to creepypasta narrations each night before bed. Now, I know for some people that is probably a terrible idea that would likely result in a state of fear, not being able to sleep, or being riddled with terrible nightmares. I even have friends that won't watch a horror movie past 9 p.m. for fear that they will not be able to sleep that night if they do. I, however, am not like most people. I've been mostly desensitized to such movies, so finding a story that really scares me is an exciting occurrence. I welcome any nightmares that may arise. As you get older, it becomes very difficult to find anything that scares you like when you were a child. Sure, there are worries and stresses that come with adulthood, but real terror becomes a real rarity by the time you hit 8th grade, other than in your dreams. So I started pulling up a creepypasta on YouTube each night before bed and letting it play as I closed my eyes, visualize the story in my head, and hope that if I was lucky, maybe I'd get the thrill of a nightmare ransacking my thoughts that evening. At least, that's what I thought I wanted until recently, when I had a nightmare so terrifying, I've had to rethink my outlook entirely. See, the strange thing about horror narrations on YouTube is that while their voices can be creepy and unsettling, they also have to be aesthetically pleasing to listeners' ears, so they also tend to have the most soothing, full-sounding voices out of anyone you might hear. And what I've come to find is that oftentimes the result is like that of a lullaby, and after listening to a couple of their stories, their voices can ease you right to sleep. That's another reason that I had continued to listen to stories before bed. Some of my favorite narrators were The Dark Somnium, Lady White Rabbit, Mortis Media, and CreepsMcPasta. Creeps was usually my go-to for falling asleep, as he has that relaxing tone of voice that just puts you at ease and makes it easy to drift off while listening to some classic internet horror stories. He also uploads nearly every day, so there's usually a new video to listen to each night, which is nice. Every now and then, Creeps will upload something known as a compilation video, which consists of all of his narrations from that month combined into one long video, which tends to land around 4 hours or so. I had fallen asleep listening to one of these compilation videos when I discovered what I'll call an intriguing life hack. I found that listening to a long enough story at just the right volume can actually result in me hearing the creepypasta narration in my dreams. This was obviously insanely cool for me. But it didn't stop there. What I discovered was that my dreams would actually change based on what I was hearing in the story. Have you ever had someone touch or kick you while you were asleep and have something similar happen in your dream as a result? I imagine that it's the same concept here, only instead of a physical response, my brain was responding to the audio. Needless to say, I had a lot of fun experimenting with this trick, forcing myself to have dreams of classic horror stories, creating playlists for myself so I can control which stories play when I enter my REM sleep cycle, and getting myself genuinely horrified when the stories took a turn for the worst. At first, if there was any kind of loud noise or music change in the narrative, it would jolt me right awake, but the more I listened, the more I became desensitized to it. After a couple of months, I was able to sleep through any music or sound effects, and Creeps was the soundtrack to my nightmares. I worked my way through the essentials until I got to teeth.jpg. I had it set up so that the story would start after 90 minutes. So basically, when my dream picked up, the story had just started. Teeth.jpg, if you're not familiar with it, is about 4 art students who live together and come back from one summer break to one of the roommates undergoing a strange and disturbing behavior change. What made this experience so real for me was that when you're in a dream, you don't really question what's going on for whatever reason. So, although the characters in this creepypasta, Josh, Lily, and Daniel, the psycho one, are completely fictional, I felt like they were my closest friends during the dream. My mind never really tried to challenge the fact that I just lived in this world with these characters. In one of the early scenes, Daniel goes missing at night, and I, as the main character of this story, end up finding the creepy teeth.jpg file on his computer.
Could have been anything. I noticed that he had a USB plugged in and 2 files on the screen. One was called Dentist Photos, and the other file was a singular image named teeth.jpg. I clicked on the dentist.
In the dream, when I'm going through the files, I keep on looking over to the door, and despite the fact that I know this story in real life, it's like I don't know what's going to happen in the moment, so I feel like Daniel is going to come walking in any second. The strange thing was, every time I looked back at the door, it was different. The lighting outside would change, and the angle at which the door was open was always different. I would see shadows on the wall sometimes, despite the fact that nobody was really there. That was tripping me out, but in addition to that, there were a bunch of files on Daniel's computer other than those mentioned in the story. And I looked at them, despite the fact that Creep's narration did not instruct me to do so. There were photos, real photos, from my Facebook page, most of which were ones that I was in. Me and my friends, me and my girlfriend, me and my ex-girlfriend. And again, at the time, I didn't realize I was dreaming. I was just taking this all at face, and it was really freaking me out. I ran out of the room and hit my foot on the door frame on the way out. It really hurt. It wasn't like a dream at all. The pain was so realistic, and it was just pulsing through my leg. There were more strange deviations that occurred in this dream. For example, when we suspected Daniel of doing something to Lily and went through his bag.
I picked up the satchel and emptied its contents onto the coffee table.
I immediately recognized the items that poured out of the bag. These were all the same objects that I have sitting on my nightstand. The alarm clock, my phone, a box of tissue, and a picture frame. I reached out to pick up my alarm clock, but when my hand got to the point of touching it, I couldn't feel anything. I couldn't pick it up. Since this was a dream, I didn't find this that out of the ordinary. It just felt more like I was doing something wrong, as opposed to some kind of glitch in reality. There were also some photographs of Lily.
We noticed on the back of the photographs, there were labels and each tooth on each photo was marked. There were notes on the photos that said things like remove or replace.
I found that these were much easier for me to interact with, and I was able to pick up each one and inspect the markings. They were Polaroid photos, which doesn't really make sense thinking back on it, but each one had Lily's teeth notated with permanent marker. We began searching for Lily, and it felt like we were wandering aimlessly forever, days even. It's strange how time can seem to be uncompressed when you're dreaming. Eventually, we found the house. Josh kicked down the door, and we explored onward into the basement. Upon entering, I was hit with a foul odor that instantly sickened me. Typically, the smell had usually been a non-factor for me in my dreams, but this, just like when I banged my foot, was so real. I didn't want to be there anymore. I couldn't stand to go on, but I was fighting the movement of my own body. It was obeying each of Creep's commands, which was booming over us in his calm, familiar voice and echoing all throughout the basement. I wasn't in control anymore, but I could still feel the wretched nausea caused by that smell. I wanted to go outside and throw up, but I couldn't do that. I was continuing against my own will. I looked at Josh, and he actually seemed to be unaffected by it, and it was at this point where I think I gradually started to realize that I was in a dream. No, a nightmare that I could not wake up from. We found Lily's sweater. At this point, I did actually throw up. I'll avoid the grotesque details of what happened next as much as possible, but I have to get my point across. Through my own eyes, I could see the puke piling up on the floor, but how I felt was much different than that. It was like it was piling up and wouldn't leave my mouth. I started spitting, choking, doing whatever I could to prevent myself from drowning in my own waste, but the grossness of all of this was making me sicker and making it clog my mouth even more. I felt like I was gonna suffocate, and then somehow I was able to clear my airways. I'm not really sure how. Anyways, sorry about that. No more gross parts. We wandered around in the dark. Someone turned on a red light. I heard Josh scream. It was probably the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was so loud that it temporarily overtook the sound of CreepsMcPasta's narrations. It echoed everywhere in the room, piercing my eardrums. It felt like my head might pop, but then the echoes slowly faded out. That's when I saw Lily. Eyes gouged, teeth repurposed. At this point, I knew I was in a nightmare, and I wanted out. I tried sitting up, opening my eyes. None of that worked. I heard the footsteps come up behind me. I pinched myself. Nothing.
I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but it's okay. It's all for the sake of art.
Daniel's dialogue was perfectly in sync with the booming narration. I beat my fist against my body. No luck. I started punching myself in the face. No matter what I did, I couldn't wake myself up. That's when I was yanked backwards into the dark. My stomach dropped as this happened, and my eyes were blurry and filled with tears. I kicked, I fought, but I couldn't make contact. Daniel was beating and bludgeoning me with what must have been a somewhat sharp metal post. All the pain was real. It was an intense, searing pain. It was unlike anything I had felt in waking or in sleep. I was bleeding. I could tell because I reached to grasp my injury, and it felt wet. And then, suddenly, it just stopped as Creeps gave the final narration.
I could hear Lily choking.
I thought I was done for, but then everything around me, the entire environment, just faded away. I found myself laying in a white void. I guess it's true what they say, how you can't die in your dream. I've been laying here for what feels like days, but realistically has been about 9 hours and 15 minutes. How do I know this? My alarm just went off for the second time, and it isn't waking me up. I'm starting to doubt it ever will. Number 20. Tower of Terror. Last Ride.
When I heard that the Tower of Terror at Disney's California Adventure was being remodeled into a Guardians of the Galaxy ride, I immediately made plans with my friends, Joey and Matt, to go pay the ride one last visit. We all decided to take a Monday off and visit the park on the last day of the ride's operation, in hopes that there might be some kind of special send-off. If you've never been to Disney, Tower of Terror was a part dark ride, part free-fall ride, themed around an abandoned Hollywood hotel. Guests are told that they're entering a special episode of The Twilight Zone. 5 people riding on an elevator on one Halloween night in the 30s were struck by lightning, causing them and an entire section of the hotel to disappear into another dimension. Let me make one thing clear. I was never the type of guy who believes in ghosts. That's part of what made me love the Tower of Terror, though. The theming and effects were so well done that you really did feel like you were stepping into a dimension where ghosts do exist, and it was a lot of fun. As we walked through the Hollywood Boulevard area of the park towards Hollywood Tower, I was disappointed to see that they had already stripped off the walls, leaving behind a tower of scaffolding where construction workers were already at work transforming the outside appearance of the ride. As we turned the corner to the street where the tower was located, we were met with a huge line pouring way outside the ordinary queue area. Understandably, it seems like lots of other Disney fans had the same idea that we did, and wanted to give the ride a proper send-off. We decided to hit up some of the other rides first, and return to the Tower of Terror once the sun had gone down. This turned out to be a great idea, or so it seemed at the time, because most of the rest of the park was relatively empty in comparison. We ended up getting on just about everything else that we wanted to before returning to the Tower of Terror that evening. The tower was lit with those ominous glowing blue lights as we approached it for the final time. There was still a very long line when we got there, which we expected, so it was getting pretty late by the time we even hit the front gates of the attraction's official queue. Joey was starting to get nervous about us even making it in before the park closed, even though they were open late that night. We were actually one of the last groups to go through before they started turning people away. After welcoming us to the Hollywood Tower Hotel, a man in a bellhop uniform with dark circles under his eyes closed up the giant metal gates behind us, presumably never to be opened again. At first, I was feeling relieved to have made it in time to go on the ride, but I was quickly overcome with an uneasy feeling. Something was off. Before entering the building, the line winds through the main level terrace leading up to the building's entrance. I know the area is supposed to look worn down by the elements, but it looked even shabbier than usual. The plants were all overgrown, and some of the lampposts were broken, making it very difficult to see. I even came close to stepping on some broken glass on the ground, but the strangest part was the screaming. These were no ordinary theme park screams, though. They sounded like screams of agony, like someone was being tortured. We were wondering what was getting such violent reactions out of the riders, but eventually came to find that the screaming was coming from the speakers hidden around the area. I'm not sure if that made me feel any better, to be honest. Why would they be playing such disturbing audio for their guests? It all just seemed so weird. When we got to the covered area just outside the building, it seemed like the pillars holding up the structure had some considerable decay, and all the windows were broken. I couldn't remember exactly what this area looked like last time I was here, but I was fairly certain it was at least a little bit more put together than this. After what seemed like forever, we finally made it into the hotel. This is when things really got weird. Normally, the hotel lobby is made to look like it was abandoned in the 30s, which it still was, only this time, the room was filled with 15 to 20 Disney employees, all wearing the same Hollywood Tower Hotel bellhop uniform. They were standing straight up like soldiers all around the major set pieces in the room, and every single one of them was just staring at us. It was almost as if they were guarding something, but none of them said one word the entire time. Matt even tried asking one of the employees how much longer it would be until we reached the front of the line, to which the guy made eye contact with him and just stared into his soul with a completely straight face. I'll never forget the look of those blue eyes with the dark bags underneath, piercing at us from his pale, almost grayish skin. At this point, I was thinking that this all must be part of the park's special going away present to the fans of the ride, and they were really going all out to make the last night as creepy as possible. I let myself think that they were really outdoing themselves, and I was enjoying the show.
I also noticed that the iconic owl statue in the center of the lobby was gone, and it was replaced with a sign that said, "The Silver Lake Sisters, live at the Tip Top Club." Only Tip Top Club was crossed out in red ink and replaced with the word lobby. At some point, some construction workers came in and tried to remove the sign and some of the other furniture.
This was the first time I saw one of the bellhops react and speak up. He grabbed the construction worker's hand and said, "Sir, please, the hour is not yet upon us." I assumed that this was also part of the show. I mean, they wouldn't really be clearing the place out minutes after closure, right? At this point, riders are taken in groups to the hotel library for a briefing video. Matt and Joey walked ahead into the library, but when I tried to pass through, the bellhop stopped me and told me to wait for the next group. I tried to explain that I was with those two guys, but the bellhop wouldn't let me pass. Matt and Joey didn't seem to notice I was gone, but I figured I would catch up with them before they boarded the elevator. When it was my turn to go see the briefing video, there were only a couple people left in line behind me, so the three of us went in. We get into the orientation room and the lights go out. We sit there in the dark for what seems like ages. That's when I hear someone shuffle around behind me. I could swear it was just me and those two other guests who had come into the library. I was positive that they were the only ones behind me in line. I had to think that whoever was behind me was just one of the employees. But then, seemingly just to disprove that theory, the guy moves closer to me and starts breathing down my neck. I was getting very uncomfortable, but then, just as I was about to say something, the the orientation video starts, so I just take a step forward away from that creep behind me.
You unlock this door with the key of imagination. Behind it is another dimension. Dimension of sound, a dimension of sight, a dimension of mind.
I wasn't sure if there was something weird going on with Rod Serling's voice, almost like it was off-pitch or something.
You're moving into a land of both shadow and substance, of things and ideas. You just crossed over into the Twilight Zone.
The rest of the introduction video went on as it normally does. That is, until it got to the part where Rod addresses the audience.
Tonight's story of the Twilight Zone will be your last.
Okay, now that was definitely not normal. They must have changed up the intro video for the final night or something.
This, as you may recognize, is a maintenance service elevator. Still in operation, but not for long. At midnight tonight, normal operation of this machine will cease, and at that moment, the stars will come out to play. When this happens, you will have to fend for yourself, and your safety is not guaranteed. You are about to embark on a ride through history, and your destination, the Twilight Zone.
Alright, this is exactly why we wanted to come on the last day. I was so excited, I couldn't wait to find Joey and Matt and get on this ride. The doors opened, and we continued on to the boiler room, the last part of the hotel before we get into the elevator. The creep who was standing behind me didn't join us, however. I looked back and saw him just standing there in the dark. I couldn't see him that well. He was basically just a silhouette in this lighting, but I think I made out the outline of a bellhop uniform. Whatever. I scanned the boiler room for my friends, but I didn't see them anywhere. I hoped that they hadn't gotten on the ride without me. The more I searched around for them, the more I realized that the entire room felt kind of empty, at least considering how many people had just been in front of us. It was also freezing down here. I was getting goosebumps. I know it was January, but we were inside, and it was Southern California after all. It doesn't usually get this cold. The other two guys from the library and I were directed past the usual boarding stations up to a creaky stairway leading up. This was completely new to me. I mean, I remembered seeing these stairs before, but I always thought they were just a decoration to make the hotel feel more fleshed out than it really is. Or maybe one of those secret entrances for the cast members to access their changing rooms and whatnot. Apparently, I was wrong, and there are more elevator entrances up above, as well as more pipes, machinery, and theming. The only thing that wasn't up there was people. I tried to text my friends to see where they were at, but my phone was dead from a long day at the park. One of the employees led us to a station that was completely empty. We didn't have to wait long for the car to arrive. The elevator shaft doors parted and we entered the ride. I chose a seat towards the middle, and the other two guys filled in on either side of me. The Tower of Terror starts by traveling up to the first floor, where the doors open and the guests see a mirror. The narrator then asks them to wave goodbye to the real world. When the doors opened for our ride, I saw a man sitting directly behind me with what appeared to be a hunting rifle. This really startled me. Thinking it might have been some kind of effect, like the hitchhiking ghost in the haunted mansion, I turned back to see that there really was someone sitting there. It was the creepy bellhop guy again. At this point, I started to freak out. Not only was this the second time that this guy inexplicably appeared behind me, but he was carrying a weapon? I know Disney can have a dark side at times, but this is still Disney we're talking about, a family company. I was getting really scared that something was very wrong here, but what could I do? I was strapped into the seat. So I start to scream and panic. I don't remember exactly what I said, but
I do remember the ride violently jolting down a floor.
Next scene is a hallway full of guest rooms where riders are shown the ghosts of the 5 hotel guests who disappeared years ago. Only this time, the holograms look shockingly realistic, and they don't seem to notice us. They're just standing in the hotel talking. The audio isn't that loud, but they seem to be arguing with the employee about something, and the woman is sobbing. Again, it was difficult to hear over the rain and thunder, but she said something along the lines of, "Don't make us go." She's crying, begging and pleading, and the employee is just standing there with a disgusted look on his face. Before I can gather any more information, a huge flash of lightning fills the room. This may have been a special effect, but I distinctly remember feeling the heat of this lightning strike. What I saw when the smoke cleared completely devastated me. I saw all 5 of the bodies sprawled out on the floor in a disturbingly realistic death scene. The man seemed to have vomited all over himself, and the little girl's hair was standing up on end. But the creepiest part had to have been her eyes, which had rolled into the back of her head. Her eyelids seemed to be sparked open, and it was almost as if her blank stare was pointed right at me. I was completely at a loss for words, sounds, anything, when the ride jerked upward again to the top level. The ride stopped at the top, like it always does. It was dark. There were only a few main lights left on in the park. I guess the other major attractions were already shut down for the night. instead of the usual audio, the narrator was just laughing like a madman. After a while, it went quiet and nothing happened. I was beginning to think that the ride was stuck, and to be honest, it was almost a relief after everything that I had seen. The moment of solace, however, was short-lived when I felt the man behind me, who I guess I had temporarily forgotten about in all the chaos, grab onto my shoulder. At this point, I knew there was nobody who could help me, but I was internally freaking out, and I didn't dare turn around and acknowledge what he was doing. Now I know that people are going to call me out and say that I made this story up for attention, and I know people are going to try to prove that most of these occurrences are absolutely impossible, and I can't really blame them for that. But what I saw next, even if it was just for a fraction of a second, has stuck in my mind perfectly since that night, and I'm 100% sure of what I saw. As the ride started to drop, and the man behind me increased the pressure on my shoulder, the on-ride photo camera flashed. And for a split second, I saw 3 construction workers hanging by the neck from the top pole upon which the camera is mounted. These were not holograms, and even though I only saw them for a split second, I'm quite sure that they were not props either. After that first drop, the elevator continued to bounce up and down at nauseating speeds. Between the G-force and the pressure of the man grabbing my shoulder, I felt like I was about to pass out. I actually started to black out and closed my eyes when I felt the ride come to a screeching halt. I was ready for this horrific nightmare to be over, but apparently the ride had other plans. Once I opened my eyes and regained my composure, I found myself on the second floor, the one with all the guest rooms. The dead bodies were still there, but now they had ghosts standing over them, motioning for us to come closer. This was actually probably the most normal thing I had seen since getting on the ride, as it resembled the scene that usually takes place on this floor during normal operation. Then, to my surprise, our harnesses came off. I was essentially frozen in complete shock. What the hell was going on? The creepo behind me continued to hold my shoulder while the other 2 riders got out of their seats and casually walked through the door to the right, which, to this point, I wasn't even aware was a real door. I had always just thought it was a facade, much like the stairs in the boiler room earlier. After, I'm not exactly sure how long, I snapped out of my daze and realized this was my chance to get out. I wriggled myself free of the man's grasp and made a beeline for the right side door. It was locked. I banged myself against it, but it wouldn't budge, so I darted across to the left side door, glancing at the elevator car and passing. The man in the bellhop uniform was just sitting there, giving me this creepy, sadistic grin. To my surprise, the door on the left worked, and I slammed it shut behind me.
I stumbled up a seedy, narrow staircase,
at the end of which was another door. I bursted through, hoping to make it to the lobby or something, but instead found myself in an abandoned swimming pool. What in the world? I mean, how could this possibly exist here? I know for a fact that the pool has never been part of the ride, the queue, or any of the theming surrounding it. I vaguely remember a sign pointing to a pool on the beginning of the line, but come on, it was just a sign. Did I stumble upon one of those crazy Disney secrets, like Walt Disney's New Orleans Square apartment, or the fabled basketball court under the peak of the Matterhorn? Perhaps this pool was at one time an employee lounge of some kind? All the tiles were cracked, and the pool was filled with rust and who knows what else. There were a couple of dark objects at the bottom of the pool. I had to force myself not to look and assume that they were pool chairs or something, but I had a bad feeling in my gut about what they may actually be. Whatever it was, it looked disgusting and I wanted to get the hell out of there. I looked around for another exit, but the first thing I noticed was a lump across the pool. My first thought was that it was a dead body until I saw a guy stand up and start wobbling around like a drunk. He was wearing a hoodie and tattered jeans. My initial impression was that this was a homeless guy who had somehow snuck in and was living here. When he saw me, he started screaming at me. He kept saying, "You can't take my home," and cursing at me. He was clearly intoxicated. As soon as I figured out where the door was, I made a mad dash for the exit, which may have in fact been an entrance because it led me to a dimly lit locker room. I guess that if that was one time a pool for employees, that this must be the corresponding locker room. The lockers were pretty small, and most of them were open and empty. The only sound I could hear was that of running water on the far side of the locker room in the dark. After all that I'd experienced, I thought it might be best to approach the door on the other side of the room more stealthily. I was also feeling very sick and needed to catch my breath. I still felt like I was going to pass out. I walk over to the source of the water, keeping my footsteps as quiet as possible. There are a few shower stalls up ahead. I poke my head into the first, and it's empty. I proceed, continuing to check on the second, third, and fourth stalls. But what I see in the fourth stall stops me dead in my tracks. In the corner of the shower, an old man stands in the shower's stream. He's naked, senile, and borderline deformed, and he has his head buried in the corner. Luckily, he doesn't seem to notice me, so I decide to tiptoe past him to get to the door. I make it across safely, but as I grip the door handle, I hear a terrifying cry out from behind me.
I see you. You'll never get me out of here. You're the one who has to go.
I hear wet footsteps charging out of the shower stall behind me, and waste no time yanking the door open and fumbling my way through the next room in the dark. This leads me back to the original mirror room. The elevator car from the ride is now there, seemingly just waiting for me. The creepy bellhop guy is in the same seat, continuing to stare me down. I don't even bother to stop running across the mirror room, through the door on the other side. Now I'm in another hotel corridor, but different from the one upstairs. At the end of the hall, I see a woman, and yet another bellhop character, this one wearing a red pair of Mickey Mouse ears with an Iron Man logo on it. The two are having a dispute. She's screaming and grabbing onto the sides of the doorframe as he violently tries to pull her out of the room. She's screaming, "Please, don't make me go," and he would just methodically respond by telling her that her stay is up and she's welcome to check into one of their other hotels. He then yanked her hard enough for her to lose grip on the door, and she flew across the hallway, crashing her head on the wall hard enough to draw blood. She collapsed on the floor in front of him. That's when he looked up and noticed me, with the same intense stare that the bellhops down in the lobby had given us. My vision was starting to get blurry, so I decided to go into one of the rooms to see if I could buy myself some time. I assumed that all of the doors were fakes, but was pleasantly surprised when one of them actually opened, leading to yet another corridor. I was too tired to try to comprehend how this was possible, given the layout of the ride, and given the fact that these secret rooms have no reason to exist in the first place. Just then, the room went dark, and the walls, floor, and ceiling became projection mapped with the starry night sky, the same effect used in the second floor of the actual version of the ride. At the end was a single door. I took this as the metaphorical exit to the Twilight Zone, so I ran to it as fast as I could. As I was running, I heard the narrator's booming voice one last time.
Next time you try to mess with history, make sure you know just what kind of vacancy you're filling, or you may find a few nasty surprises coming your way. You may or may not have made it through tonight, but to close this door is to forever live on in your head in the Twilight Zone.
And just like that, it was over. The sound of the 30s soundtrack played in my ears, and I was making my way down the stairs, trying to think about if Joey and Matt had had a similar experience to what I had. And what happened to those two strangers? What if I was the only one to make it out? Who would believe me? A light caught my eye. The ride photo. At the top of the drop, the guy was grabbing on my shoulder, not to mention the hanging bodies that would also probably be in frame. I ran up to the preview screen. If I needed proof, this would be it. But when I looked at the photo, it was just me and the two other guys. No creepy bellhop, no bodies, just a regular ride photo. The gift shop was completely devoid of any gifts or people, so feeling defeated, I passed through and met up with my friends. As I had feared, they made no mention of anything abnormal and asked if I was okay. A regular Disney employee in a yellow button-down shirt informs us that the park is closing and to make our way to the exits. We walk out of the park. I turn back to see the lights coming down in the Tower of Terror one last time. There are already cranes in place, ready to start ripping pieces off the structure. Other than that, though, it looks completely normal from the outside. No hanging bodies at the top, nothing out of the ordinary. Before turning back, I see a window open on one of the floors near the top. I stop walking. Joey asks what's gotten into me as I stare back at the ride for the final time. A light shines out the window, and the silhouette of a bellhop sticks his head out and waves at me. I don't plan on going back to ride the new Guardians of the Galaxy ride when it opens. I believe in ghosts.
Thanks for listening to all of Dente Creepypasta. Your total today comes out to $249,172.84. But if you like this video right now, I'll waive that fee and give you everything you just listened to absolutely free. If you made it this far, my question for you is this. If I were to make a movie out of one of these stories, which one would you like to see adapted the most? Let me know when you stop by the comment section. And congratulations on making it to the end of Season 1. This season, I tried to push the boundaries of what could be done with an audio horror story. I brought you all new and original scripts, some of the best narrators in the game, cinematic sound design, and a completely original score. Next season, I'm taking it even further and doing some things that have never been done before. I've already got a ton of cool episodes planned for Season 2, and I'm hoping to once again change the game of audio-based horror and continue to collaborate with some of your favorite narrators. If that's something you'd like to see, then make sure you're subscribed to CZsWorld for new horrors every week. Ring that death bell for notifications, and I'll see you in the next season, assuming we both survive.